Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host, Hugh, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement. And the $1,000,000 question that everyone is asking, P, is today the day you're eating shoe leather?
Absolutely not. Today is not that day, but it will be happening on Friday.
Oh!
Get ready. Get yourself hyped, and you will certainly be disappointed, but it's happening. So...
But like when it doesn't, because at this point I've become so accustomed to you welching on bets, like what are we gonna do? Do you pay with like an eyeball, like eye for an eye type of stuff, or
Jesus.
What's gonna happen?
No, I'm definitely not gonna gouge out my eye because of this bet. But I mean, look, man, I've invested heavily in this. You've seen it. Wrong one. I have the fucking chef's hat, the whole deal, the whole 9 yards. It's happening.
All right.
It's happening.
Well, hopefully you get the last yard, because I know you don't play football, but you need 10 yards for the first down, my guy.
I thought there was a basketball involved.
We have a jam-packed episode for you guys today. We'll kick things off with news and notes in just a moment. Today's guest is going to be Paul Sztorc, because I recently discovered his series of essays, and he decided to dunk on me on Twitter for that. So this will be a really fun conversation. And then, of course, it's Wednesday, so we have a new episode of FedWatch with Ansel and CK. But let's get things kicked off, and we're going to talk jobs. So the latest jobs report showed that we lost 1.1 million job openings over the last month. To be fair, this number is falling from very, very high levels, but the current drop is massive. It's about a 10% drop month over month. And this is a very uncomfortable time, in my opinion at least, to see a decline in job openings when you have today Amazon announcing they're freezing corporate hires. We had last week Meta. We've seen Coinbase and Gemini in our own industry. We've seen companies like Snap and Lyft as well have hiring freezes. So this is going to be a very uncomfortable moment. I think the Fed is going to have to pay attention to these type of clues. However, these don't necessarily show up in the unemployment numbers, which is what the Fed tends to use when they justify their behaviors and decision making. So while you may see certain numbers that don't necessarily look uncomfortable, this is, in my opinion, the signal that tells you, hey, worse is not yet here. It is about to get a lot worse in the jobs market. But I don't know if either of you two have anything more to add in regards to the jobs markets here.
Yeah, I got a quick thing. I know today's decline was worse than the great financial crisis as well as the tech bust. It was only usurped by basically the COVID lockdowns back in March of 2020. So this is actually technically the second worst jobs close or job openings close drop since then. Yeah.
Holy shit, that's insignificant.
Yes.
I mean, if you really
but this is what the
it,
Fed wants, right? They're like, people are too employed. We need people to be starving in the streets just a little bit, though.
Yeah, yes and no, because this is not like unemployment numbers. These are just like job openings closing. So like people technically haven't lost jobs. It's like jobs drying up. So,
but people are losing jobs. It's happening very quietly behind the scenes of Meta's laying off people. Like, oh, we're doing layoffs now, or this company's going to start having a hiring freeze. This is, to Chris's point, like these are not figures that will impact how the Fed necessarily retorts what they're doing back to us. However, this is, in my opinion, like a very real net effect on just the economy and how we will see things. And it's really worth, I think, everyone stopping for a second and recognizing the fact that if the worst period in history where this happened was because of COVID during a quote unquote black swan event, this is that significant then, because you can almost ignore and like throw out what should be considered an outlier and recognize, hey, we're not having lockdowns. There's no like, oh, like COVID is going to kill you, stay home rhetoric going on. You're seeing an influx in people being asked to show back up in the office. You're seeing inflation going to all sorts of levels now. You are really seeing the economy break in real time with statistics like this, in my opinion. But they're not going to talk about that. So P, let's talk about crypto secure.
Wait, what about Amazon freezing hiring?
I literally just said that. It's so nice to know that you listen to the conversations we talk
I only
about.
listen to about every 5 things you say. I also, my apologies, but I also, Amazon just announced that they're doing like a second Prime Day because of these issues, right?
Well, this isn't like they just announced. This was, I think, in Q2 earnings report. They said that they needed to essentially do this because they anticipate this year's Prime Day to not have the effect that it has had in the past. And that was confirmed after Prime Day, which is right after July 4th.
Yeah, July sometime, right?
It's right after July 4th. But, I mean, you got to think of it like this. You are a retailer asking consumers to spend more money at your place of business at a time period where people are getting laid off in mass. There are less and less job openings all of a sudden. Like, you are going to see businesses that are over levered really struggle in the coming months. I think it is going to be, there's a lot more pain, but there's also a degree of this where everyone thinks there's a lot more pain coming, and where the crowd thinks everything will go tends to be wrong. So who knows?
Interesting. Very interesting. All right.
If I did, I'd be in Las Vegas right now.
Got it. Our next story is Mastercard is trying to reach its disgusting hand deep into the bowels of all of our financial transactions, as they always are, but even more so now. They have announced that they are releasing a new quote-unquote crypto security product. They just released an official press release. They're calling it Crypto Secure, and it is an artificial intelligence algorithm designed to assess the likelihood of criminal activity related to the cryptocurrency exchanges on the Mastercard payment network. The system makes use of information from multiple sources, including the blockchain. This is total bullshit. You should be able to do what you want to do with the money that you have earned and you have access to. And this is yet again just further encroachment into our financial rights. Doesn't surprise me at all. It should not surprise any of you. But as Bitcoin becomes more undeniable, we're going to see more and more attempts to remove the financial freedom and agency that things like Bitcoin provide. This tool is powered by CipherTrace, which is a California-based, Chainalysis platform, and Mastercard acquired them a while back. I'm curious to see how this relates to, it sounds like this is just focused on exchanges specifically. So I don't know if it's people that are trying to buy, quote unquote cryptocurrencies with their credit cards, or how this works, but they talk about how it's going to like tag all transactions with sort of like a red, yellow, green flag that is like, what is the chance that this was involved in some nefarious shit? But we got to push back on this extremely strongly and understand what's actually going on here.
Yeah, definitely. Did you guys see, there was a great clip like the other day on Twitter of the CEO of Chainalysis getting interviewed by Elizabeth Warren in front of Senate. And, she's like, cryptocurrencies are used for money laundering. And someone like cut that clip. And then in a tweet, they're like, using cryptocurrencies for money laundering is moronic and idiotic. You can just go to Deutsche Bank and they'll just do it way easier. And I was like crying, laughing. It was so good. So well done. And then someone responded, like, oh, you use Deutsche? I use HSBC. They're even easier to use than Deutsche Bank. So it's just very, very funny.
Use the current banking system for all your monetary needs, not financial advice. Chris, let's talk Elon for a sec.
Yeah, so as we mentioned yesterday, Elon, it looks like he's finalizing the deal of Twitter. So they're going through the legal proceedings, and it looks like he is, or Elon Musk said, like he's going to proceed with the deal at $54.20. And so that puts at the original price of $44 billion for the acquisition of Twitter. This is also the equivalent right now in Bitcoin's current price of about 2.1 million Bitcoin. So that is pretty absurd. when you really think about it. They actually halted trading of the Twitter stock due to volatility when Elon like tweeted out that basically they're going through with the deal. It halted at 51.80, and then they resumed trading of the stock later yesterday afternoon. Obviously, we talked about this before. Nothing can stop Bitcoin. Bitcoin keeps going. It's 24/7, 365. There's no circuit breakers like in the stock market. There's no halting of it. There's no confiscating someone else's bonds or treasury or whatever. So yeah, I guess that it's just the traditional financial markets are proving why you need Bitcoin and why it is important to hold some of it in self-custody yourself.
You just said, I want to correct something. You said some of it in self-custody. All of your Bitcoin should be in self-custodied. Do not give...
Fed. Chris is a Fed, don't forget.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. That makes more sense now. Take control of your own private keys. Not your keys, not your coin. Otherwise, you have to accept you're going to get fucked.
I want to just quickly point this out. We've seen stocks get halted on the downside a lot. A lot of people get upset over that a lot of times. This is just an example we saw of a stock getting halted because of a lot of volatility on the upside. Your two big reminders: volatility does not necessarily mean bad things. It also can mean good things, as Twitter shareholders saw yesterday. And just a reminder that the stock market is your legalized casino and they make the rules, not you. They are the house. P, let's talk about China for a second.
Yeah, we are seeing a significant uptick in the level of control of citizens at the end of a barrel of a gun. Specifically, China has started enforcing a zero COVID policy, and they're using machine guns to enforce that. I can't pronounce this word, but it's Xishuangbanna Airport in Yunnan. It's pretty chilling. There is a tweet that I don't think we're going to pull up, but basically it's
yes, we are. Roll the tape.
Roll the tape. We're not rolling the tape. Oh. So China was incredibly their response to COVID when it was first sort of exploding out into the world in 2020 was extremely robust. There were all these terrifying videos of them welding people into tenement buildings, and they've continued to go super hard in terms of preventing the spread of COVID. It's so crazy to me that even in the age we're in right now, where so many other countries are relaxing their COVID restrictions, realizing that this is not as serious as we all thought it was back in 2020 initially, but China just continues to attempt to use COVID as a stick to basically beat people into compliance. And it's very hard to interpret. I was talking to a friend of mine who is Chinese, and they were saying that basically their claim was that Xi is just a germaphobe, and that that their policy is firmly based in his fear of the spread of COVID. I don't know if that's true, but as I said, the contrast between the rest of the world's response overall and China's is really, really dramatic to me. There's also some other stories around China starting to really step up the threat of violence to its own citizens. China has opened police stations in other countries, specifically in the US and Canada, to monitor Chinese citizens. The New York Post reports China's opened dozens of overseas police stations around the globe to monitor its citizens living abroad, including locations in New York City and 3 in Toronto. These operations eschew official bilateral police and judicial cooperation and violate the international rule of law and may violate the territorial integrity in third countries involved in setting up parallel policing mechanisms using illegal methods. I'm not quite sure what to make of this. It's very strange to me. I don't know how this would work in terms of like embassies cooperating with these groups or what's really going on here. I'm curious what the two of you think. Have you read into these stories at all? Have you heard about these?
I hadn't heard of the police stories. I know a bunch of people in the comments are saying, is this a psyop? I mean, it very well could be. I mean, they kind of overhyped, and there was a lot of like looking back in hindsight of March of 2020 when they were kind of like people passing out in the streets and like fainting, and then like, but then there's other people walking by without like a care. If you look in the background, I have not heard about the police station stories, but yeah, it's very concerning. Even if this is a psyop, like why would China be putting out propaganda of them like holding shotguns or machine guns in the airport with people walking by? Very concerning for the least.
Yeah, it is worth noting that our sources on the China police stations come from Fox News, New York Post, as well as Mint and Washington Times. So there are a few different sources for this. These police stations are in New York, 3 in Canada, and 1 actually in Ireland, of all places, over in Dublin. This is concerning. And then at the same time, I almost want to say, man, like we in America live in a country where our police force has more funding than the Chinese military does. Like we are a police state, whether or not we think we are. And unfortunately, things like, oh, let's further strengthen our police force and give, I think, support to or give the responsibility of overseeing and taking care of this subset of citizens to a foreign country. Like, as far as national security goes, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I understand, like, China pretty much just owns us based on how much U.S. debt they hold. Is this like a part of some larger deal going on? Potentially. Is this a whole lot of nothing? Potentially. I just think it's a really uncomfortable precedent to set where Chinese citizens in the United States have to live by Chinese laws. It's a really dangerous precedent you're setting, guys.
Yeah. There's something weird going on here, though. I mean, to Chris's point, this really does reek of a psyop. Like if one was a Chinese government official and wanted to instill fear in Chinese citizens, even those living abroad, this is the kind of press you might put out. So I'm very curious as this story develops to learn more about how much of this is just essentially government propaganda versus actual reality. It's also, I cannot wrap my head around the idea that the United States and Canada and Ireland would just sort of be like, I mean, what can we do? This is just happening. There's got to be more to this, because the idea of allowing other countries to establish their own like sort of extra legal police forces in their countries, that just seems bonkers to me. There's no way my reaction is there's no way that's happening. So there's something else going on here. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about what might be the funniest story that
This story is awesome.
ever discussed in News and Notes. To anyone who works in Hollywood who's watching this is the story you go and get the life rights for and turn into a movie. But we have Cain and Abel in 2022. What do I mean by that? I mean, let me walk you through this story. Brother A, arrested. We'll get into why he was arrested, but part of his arrest included a wallet, a treasure that had a lot of money, like more money than you, me, P, Chris combined, add a zero, more than that. And lo and behold, little brother is like, yo, I know big bro's got a stack. What if I try to like get into his hard drive wallet with the passcodes that I have and send that Bitcoin somewhere else? Well, little brother was successful. And all of a sudden, you have big brother getting questioned even more by the police, saying, what are you doing? You must very clearly be involved in this. You are clearly telling someone what's going on and how to do this. And all of a sudden, like the police and the judge, through a court order, ask older brother to essentially turn over all of his passcodes to his private keys so that the FBI can in turn wipe clean the hard drive so that no more funds can be stolen from it. Meanwhile, little brother, enjoying the lavish lifestyle, decides to take a bathtub to a New York City club, a literal bathtub, where he proceeds to lay in and cover himself in dollar bills, y'all. And of course, takes a picture of this and posts it on social media, because what would any douchebag who has too much money and is literally throwing it around in the middle of a nightclub going to do? Take a picture, because picture didn't happen, right, bruh? Right? Well, guess what? The FBI used that pic and went and arrested little brother, but we're not done. We're not done. Older brother testified and is turning against little brother and is now going to get to walk out. Little brother's going to get locked up for an estimated 20 years. His trial starts, I believe, this week or next week, when he does get free.
No,
oh shit!
Q in the
You
middle
fucking
of the
got
story.
him. Well, while we wait for Q to jump back in. Oh,
Where did
you're
I
back.
lose you guys?
Right there, like just very briefly. When
You were
you
like,
saying
little
that.
brother's gonna walk free, and then it was like,
Well, the punchline of all of that, which I'm so mad everyone missed out on, but little brother looks like he'll be going, his court trial starts this week or next week. He's going to be put up for potentially 20 years in prison. When he does get freed and they do finally have a family reunion over Thanksgiving, that's going to be a really, really uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner.
yeah. I mean, I also want to just go into a little bit more detail here. This is aside from the fact that it's hilarious, that, you know, Cain and Abel vibes, just total insanity. There's more going on here. The older brother was originally charged with money laundering because in 2020, because he created essentially, I'm not sure if CoinJoin is technically the right term here, but a CoinJoin like service. And he was advertising it as something that would help obscure your financial transactions. Now, as we talk about a lot on this show, financial privacy is a human right. It should not be the purview of government to have visibility into financial transactions overall. So the older brother was arrested basically in a situation, as I understand it, that was similar to kind of what's happening with Tornado Cash, right? This is, again, the government saying, if you're hiding transactions, if you want privacy, you are de facto a criminal. And so there's that aspect of it, which is just fascinating and fucked up. And then there's this additional layer on top of it, which is they arrested the older brother for creating this quote unquote mixing service. And then they thought they had locked up his funds because they don't understand how things like Bitcoin works. And then the younger brother had access to the private keys, basically, and then was sweeping those funds. And then, authorities freaked out and were like, what the fuck's going on? Wow, you're moving your funds. And then the older brother turned to the little brother. So there's so much going on here, so much nuance, but it's fucked all the way around.
Great story, though. I agree with Q. This is going to make for an excellent movie one day. Like, great movie.
And the tool that the older brother had created is called Helix, and it was a Bitcoin, quote unquote, mixing service. And so they went after him because they were like, you're money laundering. You're preventing us from being able to get visibility into other people's transactions. So go fuck yourself.
Gotta love the government. Right, Chris? We love the government here. I'm on your side, buddy. Talk to us about the IMF, though.
Well, we are talking about the government. Leads right into the story. So EU puts crypto at the top of their list for the IMF meeting. The EU is looking to exchange views on the development of crypto legislation with the U.S. officials during this week's International Monetary Fund World Bank annual meeting. If that is not like the collaboration or the culmination of where James Bond villains meet, I don't know what is. At this annual meeting, they're going to call for growth in a more coordinated global regulatory framework for cryptocurrencies. So yeah, like even on the agenda, I mean, the only thing they need is just like the opening speech by like Klaus Schwab, and it's like set in place. But yeah, any thoughts there, guys? All right.
I'm just surprised that they're not also including like a conversation around like, I don't know, bug meat, the future of protein, and also why renting your home is better than owning any property ever again. Like, I'm assuming that's just the agenda. Like, boom, 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 right?
Well, P would be there, and then he would obviously miss his shoe eating thing on Friday. So I'm glad that
Oh, so
didn't call
they
for that.
pushed the bug protein to the next IMF meeting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Got it. I mean, I would like to. I want a guest list of this because I think that could be really telling. Because depending on if they're inviting people, well, we're going to talk about this in a moment, in much greater detail with Paul Sztorc. But like, if Vitalik is invited to this event to speak, the entire rhetoric and the goal of this is to help people understand why they need to push proof of stake. Like little things like that will be very interesting. I do think there is a world where the IMF is sitting there trying to figure out, all right, it's inevitable, this whole crypto thing. And like, I just imagine a bunch of like senile 80-year-olds all in a circle being like, oh, magic internet money is just going to exist forever. Which one should we, I guess, tell people to use? The one that we like have the most of, right? Okay, which one should we buy the most of now? So I don't know. It'll be really interesting. I don't expect anything positive, fluffy, or nice to come out of the IMF. In fact, I kind of anticipate like you walk into the IMF offices and like you're just never seen again. But I don't know. Chris, you went one time, right?
I've not been, no.
Yeah, but that's what you would say if you were a fucking spook.
Exactly. All right, Pete, let's talk Telegram.
Yeah. So news just came out. Telegram is now offering anonymous peer-to-peer trading for Bitcoin. They have an anonymous P2P bot trading function for Bitcoin using their official wallet bot. Apparently, it only deals in RUB right now and allows paying the seller directly via bank transfer. This is developing, but I'm really curious what's going on here and sort of how Telegram is exploring the kind of potential regulatory risk involved in this. As I understand it, as I said, this is an official Telegram bot, but I'm just surprised.
I can't wait to send all of my Bitcoin to you, the P that I talk to every day on Telegram. Or at least the guy told me he's P, so I don't know.
Will he give you 2 if you send him 1? Is that the deal?
Dude, he sent me 4. I had to send him 5 though, so I thought that was a little weird and the math didn't line up, but I don't know.
Oh, no, you know what? I'm reading this in a little bit more detail. It is actually unclear to me that I don't think this is an official Telegram bot. I think it happens to be an account that is at wallet. And this may involve a shitcoin. Okay, more details need to be explored here. We'll get back to you on what's going on here exactly. But this may just be a random developer who's building this thing out, and because it has the address or the name rather at wallet, I think maybe people picked up on it and were reporting it as this is official.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue to a story that we have more information for you guys. The UK, after Liz Truss watched our show repeatedly and how many times we were dunking on her, specifically all of the mean things that were said about the UK and the UK government on this show, just this show. We were the ones who did this for you guys over the UK. You are welcome, win some hex. No more tax cuts for the rich in the UK, because I guess that doesn't work with their quantitative easing policies, to say the least. The about face comes 1 week after the announcement went out. The British pound did see a nice little tick up off of the heels of this reversal. My dreams of calling it the Arsenal soccer team are thwarted for a few more years. And then I do want to just touch on one other story very quickly. Yesterday, it was announced that OPEC Plus has agreed to cut oil production by 1 million barrels a day. This should mean that higher oil prices are coming, and I'll be completely honest with you guys. I don't give a damn what anyone says about the oil prices are going down. I almost paid $7 a gallon for gas this weekend in LA, and I'm just like, what? I thought we said oil prices are going down. So yeah, that's going to be really fun as inflation continues to rip higher and higher. And then of course, we're going to see unemployment rip higher and higher, as we mentioned at the very first story. I do want to point out a quote from the Saudi Aramco CEO where he kind of highlighted and mentioned China, because China has been going through these phases of lockdowns and then non-lockdowns because of their zero COVID policy. And he worries that should China decide to do an about face and get rid of this zero COVID policy, China's energy needs will exponentially increase, and there's not enough oil in the marketplace to power everyone and then a reawakened China. So they're cutting oil production just as China could potentially fully open up. And I'm going to say this again, and I don't give a damn how stupid it makes me sound. The solution to the global energy crisis is to allow Iran to sell their oil in the global markets. Enough being stupid. Like, I have so much bias when it comes to that statement, and I know that. So Chris, like, rein me back in. Like, I know there are countless other solutions, but when you're hearing what could lead to potentially even higher gas prices than we saw this summer, like, how do you guys feel?
I'm still wrapping my head around the idea that you're having to pay almost $7.
Dude, I kid you not. We stopped at the gas station because we were desperate, and I was like, I'm not going to fill up. I'm going to get like maybe 2 gallons. We'll go to Costco like later after we are done with the day. It was $1.20 cheaper at Costco than it was where I filled up earlier. Like, it's insane.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around. I also, in response to the thing you said a second ago, I just think that implying, or rather applying, sanctions and is sanction the right term in terms of what's happened? What, Iran being okay, great. Yeah. I think that is moronic overall, and I think it harms everybody else. I think trying to prevent countries from thriving and punishing them by limiting exports of something that the rest of the world desperately wants and needs in order to try to harm a specific regime is ridiculous, and fucks up the market and distorts everything.
There's also the second layer where Iran very much doesn't want or need a middleman to take a little cut of the resources that they themselves produce, manufacture, and have. And unfortunately, Western countries are aghast and offended that Iran wouldn't pay a little kickback to the likes of the British or the US, almost as though these countries are like a goddamn cartel that run the world.
It's like a legalized mafia, basically. It's like the best way to describe it.
I mean, OPEC Plus is a cartel, full stop. And I understand that Russia is under sanctions, and I am not condoning Putin. However, it's so moronically hypocritical that Russia, while under sanctions, still has a seat at OPEC Plus and still gets to participate and make decisions despite being under sanctions and despite not being able to sell their oil, wink, wink. Meanwhile, they'll sell it to China, they'll sell it to Turkey, they'll sell it eventually to, my best guess is going to be Italy, and then these countries are going to mark it up and then sell it back to the West. Like, we are getting what we are asking for, in my opinion. We cannot continue to act surprised in 6 months when oil prices continue to go up, when we allow and continue to make decisions that in turn limit how much oil will be in the marketplace. It is a simple supply and demand economics with this. So I'm biased. I don't really give a damn. I've been learning way too much about Iran and US's history as of late, and I will leave us with this. When my dad came to this country in 1978, he was telling me a story about how people were furious. They were up in arms. Oil prices are just shooting through the roofs, and they were like, how are we going to afford this? You want to know what oil prices were and then went to? People were complaining when they got to 50 cents a gallon. Could you imagine? Like,
yeah, but that's, I mean, That is low by our standards, even including inflation or accounting for inflation. But that's hilarious and wild.
For context, that would be roughly, if just prices moved with just inflation alone, you're looking at about $2.27 a gallon. If it had stayed at 50 cents a gallon with inflation since 1978. But I want to remind everyone before we cut to a commercial break, Bitcoin Amsterdam kicks off in exactly 7 days from today in Amsterdam, the biggest party city in all of Europe, or so I'm told. I've never been, and they really will not let me go because they're so afraid I will not come back. But you should go, especially if you're in Europe, and you should do so by buying a ticket using the promo code BMLive, because ticket prices are going to go up in 2 days. And I don't know how else to tell you. It is going to be the biggest, baddest party in all of Europe. You're not going to want to miss it. You want to smoke weed with your favorite Bitcoiners? That's the place to do it. In fact, go find Matt Odell, smoke a joint with him, and say, like, Q told me to do this with you because I'm so sad that I can't be there to do it with him. So,
good advice. Solid advice.
Let's cut to commercial. We're going to be joined by Paul Sztorc.
Let's do it.
Thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks, and I am excited to introduce our guest today. Paul Sztorc comes to Bitcoin from academia, having formerly worked as a statistician programmer in the Yale Economics Department in 2013-2014. Paul wrote TruthCoin, a blockchain system for learning the truth about real-world events. Paul did this as a response to the closing of prediction market website InTrade in 2012 and the failure of Bitcoin-related alternatives I like to call shitcoins. Paul's writing can be found at bitcoinhivemind.com, as well as truthcoin.info. Some of his blog posts, which I recently discovered, which led to why I wanted to have this conversation, are Nothing is Cheaper Than Proof of Work and Measuring Decentralization, as well as a couple of other blog posts that are way ahead of their time, including Drive Chain and Blind Merge Mining. Paul, welcome to the show. I said a lot of things about you. What did I miss and what did I not give enough justice to?
Oh my gosh, I hope everyone can hear me. That was a really great intro, I have to say. Normally, they're not very good, but that one was very good. I was very interested in prediction markets, and I was ahead of a lot of things, like in the scaling war. There was this issue of the block size increase would make Bitcoin less decentralized. And I was like, we have to be able to measure what that is if the conversation is going to make any sense. And that insight actually led to Drive Chain. And Drive Chain has been neglected this whole time, but people are slowly coming around to how important it's going to be. But the Nothing is Cheaper Than Proof of Work, that one really paid dividends, because who would have thought that 7-8 years later, we'd still be talking about proof of work versus proof of stake? I don't know why, but we still are. And the article is still very relevant. There's a couple things in it that I think I would take back.
Oh, interesting.
But overall, the whole thing is actually very solid, because the core part of the argument is that the wasted resources do not come from They don't come from the fact that it's proof of work. They come from the fact that the block is worth something. So the block is worth $10,000. People will pay, they'll bid up $10,000 fighting over who gets it. And that is what causes the waste. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's unavoidable. So you can't make proof of work cheaper by switching it to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm super excited to talk to you today. I'm also, I get to cross off my bingo card. I was like, how long before Paul mentions drive chains? And you did it within the first 60 seconds. So got that one checked off. I think, but all joking aside, I think that it is, the Bitcoin space moves so rapidly. It's pretty amazing that this article from 2015, as you said, is in almost completely still relevant to this day. And it's just such a, I feel like it is such an eloquent sort of treatise. You go through, you define all the terms, and it's organized very effectively in a way that I think most of the articles that are even coming out today still don't do. So I'm really excited to go into it today. And I commend you for writing so clearly and eloquently on the topic.
Always, like, when you look back and you're writing from a few years ago, you're always like, oh no, because everyone improves as a writer throughout their whole life. I'm glad that people still like that one. I wrote one long with proof of work before, so that was the sequel, and that one was the origin of the metaphor of auctioning off a briefcase, and that was also where no one had heard of me before Adam Back linked to that article. So I owe everything to him. One BitcoinTalk.org posts linking to that. He quoted that part, and then no one had heard of me before.
Oh man, I didn't realize that. That first one. That was kind of the article that got you on the map.
It's funny because that one was from 2014, and then I was like, people are still talking about proof of stake because there had been a lot of problems. Proof of stake is very old, and in 2010 it was considered for Bitcoin on BitcoinTalk.org, and then it was rejected because of the cost of simulation, and plenty of people demonstrated that the proof of stake would regress to proof of work in some way or another by people simulating the blockchain. I can talk about this if you're interested.
Please, Paul, I need you to understand, like, I am such a noob in this space. And when I was reading, the first one I started actually reading was Nothing is Cheaper Than Proof of Work. And halfway through, I thought this was written like a month ago. And it like,
yeah, I know. Yeah, people link to it a lot. It makes the round every, I used to. I don't do this anymore because I don't quite care as much. But I used to have the Google Analytics going, and then I would be lulling, and then it would just one point because you have all these other chains making proof of stake constantly a big issue in the news. So,
but no, would love to dive down these rabbit holes with you. I mean, for whatever reason, we continue to see this discussion had, and I'd just love to start there. Because you kind of alluded to it just now of there's always a new coin coming up that's trying to perpetuate proof of stake. And then we have to, again, counter this argument. There's a discussion we sometimes have of like shit coins and all these bullshit projects that happen outside of Bitcoin. They're never going to stop. And rather than trying to get them to stop, we just need to focus on our stuff. Do you buy into that idea, or do you think there could eventually finally be like a nail in the coffin of shitcoins and proof of stake and other stupid ideas?
That's a very good question. I think it depends. It's a terrible answer, but I'm going to say it depends. I think if we had all of our stuff together in the Bitcoin world perfectly, and everyone knew exactly what to do to make hyper Bitcoinization happen and make Bitcoin take over every other currency in the world and every other use case in the world. If we had all that stuff together, then people would not be as interested in altcoins, or they wouldn't be able to sell them. So it's because that we don't have our stuff together that that the door is still open. And it's because it's just a combination of education and communication, but also the constantly changing technology means that people always think that it's possible to do better. And I actually think that the competition is actually good because we haven't quite worked everything out, even in Bitcoin, and we should do that as quickly as possible. And actually, it's desirable for for mankind that, you don't want to have like just a tyranny of one idea. We want to have other ideas. I have to say, in general, I'm very disappointed because all the altcoin ideas are actually terrible competitors, so they are not very good at all. They don't actually stimulate fear in Bitcoin world, or a kind of a desire to push the envelope. We're very complacent in Bitcoin. A lot of people just assume that Bitcoin will take over no matter what happens, and that is something that I don't agree with. I think we could still make a mistake and not even and blow our gigantic lead.
Yeah, we can't get complacent.
So do you think that altcoins or shitcoins are the biggest competitor to Bitcoin, or is there something else in your mind that is the biggest threat to Bitcoin?
Well, they're not very good. I think in abstract, the concept of an altcoin would be a competitor. So someone would eventually invent something that would be very Bitcoin-like. It would have keys. It would have blocks. It would probably have proof of work. One of my articles that proof of work and proof of stake are really not different. So there was no reason for Ethereum to spend all this time, millions of dollars, etc., researching proof of stake, because you would not actually be able to make anything. They would not actually be able to make something that was profoundly different. But a lot of people don't believe that, so they still do. But there's still no real problem with the logic of it. I can go into that article if you want. I imagine that's why you invited me on. That's what you said. So I can talk about that if you like. There's no altcoin today that is doing a very good job of competing with Bitcoin on its own terms, of being like conservative and reliable and being there for you in the long term when it's under attack by like the armies of the world and all this other stuff, under attack by even the media and academia and stuff like that. So Bitcoin is very, very tamper resistant. It's very reliable, and other things don't. They push the envelope in a completely different direction. So they're very bad. But someone could decide to compete on our terms and say this. It feels like
what's happening is people are aware that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to compete on a level playing field in terms of the actual value prop of Bitcoin. And so what we're seeing is this narrative attack, the leveraging this kind of ESG idea and trying to convince people that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. And it's so frustrating for me personally, because the arguments that are made and that are just repeated constantly are so spurious. Like, they just have almost no anchor in reality.
Not good at all. This has happened also, like, for as long as I can remember. This has happened. There have been ignorant points about mining that people don't care to fact check, and even rigorous people. There was that, I don't know, the paper was very rigorous, but it wasn't right about the selfish mining. Like, there was stuff where they didn't like follow the conclusion the whole way. That was like 2013 or something. Everyone could said Bitcoin was broken and everyone should sell their Bitcoins, and people said stuff that a certain mining pool had more than 50%. So the stuff about mining has always been wrong. I think it's because mining is so easy to measure and so noticeable, but I don't know. These would just be me guessing about why it's so bad. But I think the ESG thing is its own phenomenon, and we're actually just innocent bystanders, believe it or not. I think it has really nothing to do with us. It's just virtue signaling from ESG people, and they just can't wrap their head around the idea that you'd have people paying, that you have these servers that appear to be doing nothing, in quotes, although of course they're not doing nothing at all, because if they were really doing nothing, then no one would pay anything for the energy. So they should stop and think, like, what would that mean if I said they're doing nothing? But of course they're doing something important. And what they're doing is building cooperation and trust among people who don't know each other. So we have to do a lot of work for that in the real human world. We have to worry about people who are loafers, right? People who join the group but don't contribute, people who are parasites, or people who are exploitative. So in the real world, we do this cooperation in a completely different way. You have people meet, we have people gossip behind the scenes. Hey, that guy, he wasn't doing his fair. We said we were going to gather firewood, but he was just,
or he would eat shoe leather live on Bitcoin Magazine Live.
Yeah. Well, so like, you kick people out who aren't doing or people who become tyrannical. People used, in the ancient days, hundreds of thousands of years ago, they would team up on that person and like throw rocks, stone them to death, or kill them in their sleep or something.
Those are very specific examples.
But I'm just saying we have issues. The point is, we've always lived in groups, and we've always had very, very complicated ways of cooperating. And Bitcoin is just a different way of cooperating. And people just don't think it's bad optics. They take very easy aim at this server room full of computers making a lot of noise, and they just think all of this is wasted electricity. Hence, the big thing is maybe we can get away from wasting that. But then, hence my argument that it's not the type of consensus that is the source of the waste. It is the fact that each block is worth a certain amount of money, and so people are going to fight over it. You either just give someone some kind of license where they make the blocks, but there's no way that's inescapably centralized, because who is such a person? And that person would have like a kind of permanent advantage, permanent status as a super peer. They'd be above everyone. So otherwise, everyone's just going to fight over this thing. And the proof of stake people have tried for years to play whack-a-mole with these various issues, and they tried really, really, really hard to minimize them and convince everyone that they shouldn't fight over the block. It's possible that one day they will succeed, but it's just, there's no real reason to expect that. They're pouring all this money into it, and I think it is just for the ESG. They don't. Back in when I wrote that article, the comments were sort of glitched out, but I still have them, and I linked to them on Twitter. And you can see in the article, there's plenty of people like Vlad Zamfir, Jay Kwan, or whatever, all the people who were working on proof of stake at the time. In the comments section, they all agreed with me that there would be nothing that anyone could do to change what's the equivalent of the difficulty in the proof of stake world, or what's the equivalent of now the security budget or the block subsidy or the block reward. All this money coming. I don't know if this is making any sense to any of the poor people in the audience.
It's a great point. I want to take a step back.
There's just no real difference between proof of work and proof of stake. They're going to try. They can try really hard, but at the end of the day, the block is worth like $1 million. It's like, let's say all the blocks for a certain year, all of them, just the revenue side, is worth $10 billion total. So this is if you won every block for a whole year. There's like 1,000 blocks a week, so there's like whatever 52,000 blocks. There's tons of blocks. You win them all, and you win all the fees and all the new coins. And let's just say that's $10 billion a year. That's $10 billion a year that's up for grabs. So right now we fight in the proof of work world. You fight over it in a very civilized and transparent way, where you hash and everyone can see what the difficulty is, and difficulty resets. People can make partial blocks to win the shares in the mining pools, things like that. It's very simple. There's just a one SHA-256D thing that you just do over and over and over again. In the proof of stake world, you'd want to do all kinds of other things to try and win 10 billion. If you succeed, if this project of kicking everyone else off, you just wrote yourself a check for $10 billion. So that's the point, is there's $10 billion carrot at the end of a stick, like at the end of a fishing line or something, and you can see like that. That's the problem. The problem is not proof of work versus proof of stake. The problem is that there's $10 billion.
And how do you get
grabs. It? And so of course they're going to try whatever they can do. They're going to deny a service attack. Now, what I did was in the post, I tried to make this argument that was very, very kind of economically theoretical, which has caused the controversy, I think, to only continue because of how academic and abstract it was, where I said that locking up the money would mean that fewer other investments would be in the proof of, even if you got everything in proof of stake to work and there was no denial of service attacking and there was nothing anyone could do to get an edge and stake the $10 billion.
Yeah, wait, I want to pull back for 1 second, and I want to sort of define some of the terms. So when we talk about, can you start by defining at a high level what we mean when we say proof of work versus proof of stake? Like how would you define proof of work and how would you define proof of stake, just for the audience?
It's funny because the point of my article is there's very little difference.
Proof
of work is, the audience is you do this one type of computation over and over and over again. So your computer is working very, very hard. There's no other way to do it. It's just based on quantity. how many times can you do this SHA-256? This double SHA-256 hash. You're doing it really, really fast. And every 2 weeks, the bottom performers are fired. So basically, since you're just doing a computation a lot, it comes down to the electricity you spend, the money you spend on hardware, physical chips, the money you pump in, the cooling to cool the chips. And it's basically like you're running your computer, you're making your computer work really hard. Like, in the olden days, this still happens with a laptop. This doesn't happen so much anymore, but in the olden days, you would be using your computer and it would just kind of make little sounds. But then if you fired up like a game, something that was intensive, the fan would go crazy and it would start to make more noise because the computer is working really hard. So that's the work. The poor computer is working really, really hard instead of doing nothing or only working when you ask it to. It's going 100%, trying to just churn out as much of this as possible. In proof of stake, well, the idea is in the reality of the crypto system, in the reality of their blockchain, or in the reality of the coin, in that reality of the full node software, it knows somehow, which is part of the problem, this somehow, but it knows who has which coins, and it also knows who stakes which coins. And these people put the coins into a sort of hazardous state, a hazardous box. They stake the coins. They say, I buy in with a certain amount. And then they join this, what would be the class of miners in their world. And they have coins, they have a certain amount of coins staked. And then there's a complicated lottery system. There are many variants, but in general, it's kind of like the more money you stake, the more likely you are to be chosen. And when you're chosen, you have the ability to create the next block and then create the reward because you get a shot of that $10 billion.
Yeah, I mean, no, it totally makes sense. I think you made a good point though, which is what is actually going on behind the scenes in reality versus the narrative that is being pushed. And I think the narrative that's being pushed is that proof of work takes energy and proof of stake relies on, whether you have staked these coins and how much you have. And the kind of quintessential argument here is, as you said, is that they're actually kind of the same thing. The only difference is that in proof of work, all the work that is being done is kind of upfront and visible. And despite the claims of the proof of stake proponents, that work is still happening behind the scenes. And I love the term you use. I think you call it obscured proof. And you kind of say it's not proof of stake, it's just obscured proof of work. That work still has to happen. It's still required. They're basically pushing it off, kind of off chain into these hidden cost centers. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, yes, and the other thing is we won't actually know per se. It'll be so obscured that it's possible that no one will actually know what is being wasted. But there are plenty of things that you could expect. Like you could expect the rewriting the blockchain from what's called the long range, nothing at stake problem. So you could expect that, which is where you just rewrite the blockchain from a really long time ago. But the proof of stake proponents try to defeat that with checkpointing. But I want to stress, because this is maybe a good way of seeing the difference between the two, which is what you would do in the proof of stake world is you would go back far enough and you would either rewrite the blockchain from day one, or you would go back to whatever it is, 2 years ago or something, and you'd rewrite it from then, and you would make blocks. You would have your computer crunching numbers just like in proof of work. And you would have them simulate whole histories as if years of time had passed. And the reason you can do this is because there is no proof of work in proof of stake. So you could do millions or billions of complete histories from the past. And this is the attack, is to do this from very far along into the past. And you can do this such that you win all the block rewards and all the keys, or that you can put certain transactions in later or earlier, or you can even, what you can do in proof of stake world is you can go back and you can try to buy private keys from people who haven't used them anymore. They used to own, maybe they owned some Ether back in 2021. They no longer own it. So they don't care if anyone knows the private key because they sold a long time ago. So they'll sell it to you for like 10 cents. And so they give you that key, and now you have that key in your arsenal. You could stake with it when you rewrite the chain. You can have, your computer is going to be doing all this. So it requires an upfront investment of software to do.
So you're talking about like what you refer to as state grinding? With that?
Sorry. Yes. State grinding, just like all the conversions of proof of stake into proof of work would be like some kind of stake grinding. And so they're all involved, but the point, the thing you want to stress is the proof of work, when you attack proof of stake by using a supercomputer, and when it does as much computation, it's going to be doing as much computation. It's basically, you have a $9 billion a year budget for computing when you attack proof of stake, because you're trying to get the $10 billion of winning everything. You see what I mean? So you have $9 billion budget now to hire software developers, algorithms for things, and you're not going to rewrite the chain once, you're going to write it like trillions of times. And
you're going to try everything in order to get that.
The final definition of the attack is that you have many different versions, some of which could be very, very similar, other than that they're controlled by you, but they look like the real. And then what it comes down to is the Ethereum people they retreat as if it doesn't matter, to saying, well, if that happens, we will get the state of the system from someone else. We'll get like whatever. Someone will just tell us. Vitalik will just tell us what the most recent block hash is. But then you see, once you've spent the first $2 or $3 billion getting to that point, then you just spend the last $1 billion, whatever, just like doing the centralized version of the attack. You're either just like, I don't know, like kidnap everyone or bribe people or whatever it is. And so again, but now you see what's frustrating about this, if you defend proof of work, is because these type of attacks, they won't like just happen overnight when they switch to proof of stake. They would be building up. You'd be building up the strategy, and you'd say, well, don't even want to bother. So that's part of the issue, is it's not like you just do the attack as soon as they switch to proof of stake, because it's not like proof of stake is completely, like I'm saying, they're really just kind of like similar, and proof of work has the sort of anti-fragile property of just like, it's the next block is very unstable, but the whole blockchain is very stable. But with proof of stake, it's kind of like they're trying to this funnel thing where the next block is very stable, but huge breaks in the system are way easier. So, but you can see that like I continue to stress, the issue is that there's this $10 billion a year budget up for grabs, and that is what is going to either cause it to waste as much resources as proof of work, even though that may not be energy, but it will be waste $10 billion a year in equilibrium, or it will just stop working. More likely, this is the other thing, is that the Ethereum people have never cared as much about having the so-called, the decentralized peer-to-peer property, or letting everyone node. So it's this, the other thing, the other nuance to this issue is that since they never cared quite as much about that, they flirt anyway. They just say, who cares? We're going to flirt anyway with just having it be, Vitalik.com, the blockchain or whatever. And so since they never really cared, then they can kind of play this game, and they can say, look, we switched from proof of work to proof of stake, but really they never really used either. It was just kind of like the proof of work was only being used to distribute the ether. It wasn't being used for security the way it is in Bitcoin. So again, that's a rambling, confused answer, but hopefully
I was gonna bring up the story that you share actually about like the TV shows and that example, because I think that like really helps people visualize the very technical stuff that we were just talking about for probably the last like 10 minutes. Do you want to just quickly walk through?
I wrote it a long time ago. I also remember at an Acapulco, I did a panel about this exact thing with Daniel Krawitz, who said that it was the greatest. He was like debating me sort of, but he said this was the funniest thing like he'd ever read like that year or something. So he got the kick out of it. He's completely crazy.
I'm a former Hollywood agent who read this and was like, oh my fucking God, this makes perfect sense to me now.
But, yeah, in proof of work, you're an audience member watching the television show. and you tune in and you watch the next week's episode, which is like the next block or something. And the audience decides like which, if there's different blocks, the audience decides which is the sort of the real block based on the quality of the show, because you can tell like how much money did the miner spend making the block. So if the show is getting good, if it has good special effects, like you can tell a movie made in the 90s versus a movie made in the 70s versus a movie made today or whatever. Maybe that's not a great example because movies today aren't very good, but you can tell that more quality is going up, better acting, better special effects, better writing. So this is the proof of work, is the blocks have more effort. They put more effort in them. That's easy enough to understand. I think where the metaphor really helps people is the proof of stake world is a lot like the characters in the television show. They are talking about what the show is very, very cheap to make. Every episode is made for like 1 cent. And the characters in the show say that they are talking about what the next episode will be. So they point the audience towards the next episode. So you can see it's very self-referential. It's what's happening inside the show, what's happening in the blockchain, in the proof of stake blockchain, is determining the next block. And that's how you can see why someone with a really nice computer can just create billions of versions of the show and then just dump them on people, and they would not know what is canon, so to speak. Whereas it's very easy in the proof of work world to figure out what's canon, because everyone
it's the highest quality.
There's like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. It's like really, really good, and then like the next block won't be found unless it's even better or comparable quality. It's very hard to fake. This is something that people would shoot on a little inexperienced people would shoot in an afternoon on like a handheld camcorder or something.
Also known as the Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah, I think that's the exception, right? Of course. Unfortunately, this example is frustrated by modern trend in movies towards being very passionate, not good at all, and not made with care or whatever, not made with real effort. But they do take a lot of money, so that's unfortunate.
That they do. I also want to unpack. We talked a little bit about the hidden costs of a proof of stake method. I talk a lot about how the entire US dollar system is backed by the energy used by our US military and the energy it essentially takes to run the most powerful military in the entire world.
There actually is an article that came out a while ago by a fake person from Super Smash Brothers, Mr. Game & Watch, but there's an appendix in the article that is about the proof of work of the US dollar that is very good. So there's a whole appendix about this, and I put it on my site. It was on I think it was on Bitcoin Magazine at some point, but I don't remember. It was like years ago, like a long time ago, but I don't remember exactly what it was called. But there's not a lot of things with Mr. Game & Watch, so just people doing stuff like that. So there's an appendix in that it's about exactly what you say about, and it talks about like how much more money is spent on lobbying. There was like no money spent on lobbying before like the 70s. They like exploded into existence. So this is the lobbyists buying the printing press in Washington, D.C. All the, every kind of thing of that nature, of just people spending money in the real world to try and get the distorting effects of the U.S. federal budget and the Fed. The Fed's bailouts, like the Nassim Taleb part, where Nassim Taleb, he was back when he was super great after the financial crisis. He was saying that everyone in the financial world knew. They said the worst thing in the world is to underperform by a couple percentage points. You always have to push if people are pushing the envelope, you always have to push further, and you always have to outperform. And he said if you blow up and lose everything, that doesn't matter. So he's talking about the incentives in the finance industry. And so you always want to lever up, basically, so that you always have the returns go really, really, really well. And then if you blow up and have a huge collapse, that's not a bad deal, because he said everyone knew that you'd get bailed out, because this happened all the time. And I saw this I was at a lecture in person at MIT. I didn't go to MIT, but I was in the audience. They had this thing after the financial crisis with Marty Feldstein. And he said, every time we have a problem with the banks, we recapitalize the banks, which is to say we just give them money. and it's a moral hazard. They call it a moral hazard because they say they don't care now if they blow up. And it seems to let according to him, is he telling that, to what extent is his comment accurate? No one knows for sure, but he said everyone knew, and his explanation makes perfect sense. And it's child's play to do if you understand anything about finance, basic derivatives or something. You can say, well, anything will pump the returns of this portfolio up. Instead of getting 6% a year, we can get 7% a year with a 1% chance of getting like minus 100%. And then they say, well, listen, we can get 8% a year with a 1% chance of getting like negative 200% or losing something else, or like becoming owing 20 times the entire market capitalization of the company or something. So it's child's play to just keep doing that. You can hit 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%. And that's what Nassim Taleb was saying. And that is in the appendix. I remember those two things, the lobbying, all of it. And I don't remember if he added it all up and tried to see if it was like the same number, but that would actually have been really cool. I don't remember. But there's a lot of stuff like just the politicians are all the growth in entitlements is another thing. Is people used to spend a lot of money on like the Eisenhower Interstate project, which is like building the highways that connect America, or like the space race, like building a rocket that goes to the moon, like some important things, The Erie Canal was in the 1800s, but like the point is, the tax money would be used for actual things,
as opposed to bailing out banks and
now
the system.
And then it's used the Health and Human Services or whatever. Like the military is like a third, and then there's like more than a third is just like basically like welfare checks or just checks that go to people for healthcare, for whatever. It's just we're just sending people cash, so we don't actually spend it on like. It's not actually spent on like a project, you know what I mean? Like the Intercontinental Railroad or something, like something where you actually get something that would like plausibly benefit the whole. It's just paying people off.
Yeah, instead of investing in the future, it's literally just perpetuating the existing system.
So more people should do research on that issue. And like, is everything proof of work? Is everything seniorage? Is everything just an inflation tax? More people should look into that. That's a very interesting topic. This is well known. This happened like when gold was found in the Americas. There was just lots of inflation, and there's lots of people have written about that. All that stuff is interesting too. The idea that more gold doesn't help. This ironically is linked to the thing that I would probably take back from my article.
Oh, go into that.
But I don't know if people are complete noobs, they want to. But this article went for many years, and one of the things I said was that even if all the problems with proof of stake were solved and there was no possible way that anyone could ever use any of their effort to have any advantage, and I think that's basically impossible. But I was writing, even if that were the case, you'd still have the case that you have to stake money. And what I said was something like, first of all, the money staked would be way more than what is burned in proof of work, because it would be like interest. So if proof of work burnt $5 a year, hypothetically, this is a complete hypothetical, $5 a year was being spent on power, chips, whatever. Then in the proof of stake world, they'd have $100 staked, because it would be something like 5% interest rate would be like 5% interest would be. So everyone would want to stake because it's just so much easier to stake than to mine, because you just like click a little button. So because it's so easy, more people would do it. And that would be the equivalent of like the difficulty going up and up and up. So it would be chasing further away from it. And what I said was, this $100 would not change anything like in the inflation deflation world, because the money is not permanently destroyed. So if you permanently destroy $100, then all the prices will come down, because people will say, well, the money's gone. But if you only temporarily do it, then I would say people are going to wait. They know the $100 will come back. Now, I have to say, on that particular point, this is now going to become like a super graduate level PhD econ stuff. But
let's fucking go.
When I wrote that, I now think that is probably a question for like some new genius of the future to figure out exactly to what extent is that true? Because I don't think anyone knows. I tried very hard to actually figure it out. Is it the case that if you just lock $100 up for a year, does that do nothing, or does that do something? It would appear that it would. It would appear that it would do something. but I'm not sure. And I tried with a piece of paper, and I tried doing math, and I had examples, and I tried to work it out, and I got like sort of halfway there, and I got really confused. But but I hate for anyone to get too confused before I finished what I was saying. Probably already a lost cause, but what I was saying was people they lock $100 up instead of $5. So first of all, I'm saying this 20 times more money is being, all this money is being locked up because it's so much easier to stake than to actually buy mining stuff and plug them in or whatever. So all
And
this
again, we're
stuff,
talking about proof of stake. When you say people locking up $100 versus $5, you're saying in
I'm
a proof of
saying
stake system.
an imagined perfect world where proof of stake has solved all of its problems.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't think will exist, but they spent anyway. In defiance of my prediction, they spent 8 years like with huge teams of people working on them, and they did this merge. So I guess they think that they finally plugged all the holes.
Do they though? Do they think? I don't know.
I don't know if I think so. I think maybe like various people get hired on, and they kind of realize like it's a lost cause, but they kind of do what they can. They collect the paycheck, and then kind of like they're just like. Whatever, it doesn't matter because Ethereum doesn't emphasize decentralization anyway. So they're like, it doesn't matter. I'll just make a lot of money and I'll get a little career and I'll be.
I think that's the thing. I mean, that's the key piece here.
So, but anyway, in this idealized perfect proof of stake world where everything's fixed, more money is staked. I say there's still a cost because there's no deflation benefit to everyone because the money's not permanently destroyed. Asterisk, and then that money that would have. That money that is invested in the proof of stake project doesn't go out and fund some other project, anything else, building a bridge or something that the economy wants. So it doesn't. So it permanently alters the
interesting.
World. There's still a cost. So the cost is not in the form of energy, but it is and it's not in the form of denial of service attack, and it's not in the form of bribes. Because remember, they fixed all the problems. Once they have a problem, then that's where the proof of work situation. Once there's a problem, that's where the proof of work starts to leak out, and it becomes the stake grinding of just bribes, like we were saying with the U.S. dollar or whatever. But I'm saying even if you plugged all the holes, you still have investment, and then you have the opportunity cost of foregone investment.
Oh, that's so interesting.
This is like becomes like a bizarre like PhD level discussion, I think.
No, but
it's like people have a certain amount of money that they keep on for payments, like in their wallet or in their checking account. And I think this is well known that this is a certain amount that depends on the person and their situation. So you only want a certain amount, neither too little or too more. So you only want like $200 in your wallet and like maybe $10,000 in your checking account. I'm just making those numbers up. But once you have more, you say, well, now I've got $20,000 in my checking account. And you say, well, I want to put this $10,000 somewhere else. I want to put it
to work.
Right. So there's an optimal amount of cash that everyone holds. And so what I'm saying is that's true. I'm saying that's most people think that's true, and I'm saying that's true in this world. So therefore, the money that was staked was not part of that amount because you want to have the money around in case you need something to buy something. And so the money that was staked didn't come from that. It came from other investments. And the reason why I regret saying that is not because I don't think it's true, but because I think it really sent the conversation in a bizarre direction, and it made a lot of people write a lot of stuff about it. But Eric Wall wrote the only thing worth reading, I think, after I wrote it. He wrote a thing where he kind of goes a little bit down that road. But that was one of the things I said in the post. I said, even if you made it perfect, there would still be a cost to the economy, and the cost would probably be a lot worse than just energy, because in my world, there's less in the perfect proof of stake thing. There's fewer investment projects being funded, and so the future life of everyone is worse. And of course, many more people will live in the future than live today. Hundreds of trillions of people will live in the future, God willing, that we don't all kill ourselves this year or something. But and so all those people's lives will be worse. And isn't that why? What's a little bit of hydroelectric dam power compared to that? So that was what I wrote in the article. I tried to finish it off for good, but instead I think I made it too convoluted. But the core thing to remember is that carrot at the end, the $10 billion carrot is that, and that is why people always fight over that. And I think no one has really come up with any kind of way around that. except for Vitalik to try to say, and he said this in correspondence with me, that I had a later post and I had an FAQ, and I have all that stuff on my blog in the later post, which is proof of stake is still pointless. Proof of stake is still pointless is the title. But he tried to say something like, even if the $10 is up for grabs, you can make it so that it's so difficult for anyone to affect the outcome that they just don't. And then it's kind of just like magic money is falling from space. And so that was his reply. But I'm just not that out. But then, he said that, and then they've been saying proof of stake was 3 months around the corner. Every time they're super confident. And he said that was like in 2016. So that was only like a year later. And they were still like really, really confident. And year after year after year goes by. And now they finally have switched over. Was that because it's just become so complicated that no one can follow what's going on? Is it because no one actually cares what's going on anymore? Is it because of something else? Is it all just, or did they really pour enormous amount of engineering into doing this thing? And
I mean, it seems pretty obvious.
Will eventually, people will find the holes. It's contents under pressure. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you have a balloon, huge balloon, like a giant balloon, like one of those things that.
You poked a bunch of holes in it, and basically it's like as long as you keep pumping air, the balloon will maintain its shape.
And for like kids, like a huge thing that's inflatable for kids to play in, and then it's like in proof of work, it's very straightforward. It's like there's the intake and then there's the outtake, and it's just equilibrium. But the proof of stake is like, oh, we can stop that from being an outtake. But then you see the balloon will just swell up, and there's more. The more pressure, the more likely any tiny little hole people will find it, and then they'll take the 10 billion as soon as they find that one thing.
Yeah.
So I think most people who studied the proof of work versus proof of stake thing just kind of like completely lost interest by 2015, 2016, 2017. And they're just like, I don't want to pay any attention to this anymore.
Yeah, because it's noise.
Because it's very boring, even because it didn't really go anywhere. So it's an intriguing thing that I think people have just stopped, including myself. Like, I'm not really that interested. No one, like, you can see why I would not be interested in it, because none of the fundamental objections.
I loved your tweet earlier today where you were like, going to talk about this super interesting and relevant thing.
No one's discussed. Yeah, constantly for years, people will bring this up. They bring up the article. So I think it's a very interesting topic. As you can see, it's not so much that the article is people often bring up my article and they say proof of stake is a complete pile of garbage, which I kind of think it sort of is, but my article doesn't really say that. My article just says the thing about the balloon, that it's really the same thing. If you try to plug all the holes, you just get more pressure. And so people will be looking for the holes, because the problem is the $10 billion a year of revenue.
And when you say the holes, it's strategies that take advantage of that. And again, I just want to bring it all the way back around.
And they say you cannot costless simulate. Well, then they'll say, okay, then I'll denial of service attack my rivals. And then they say, okay, if they magically fix denial of service attack, then you say something else like, I'll buy old private keys, or and then if they say you can't do that,
because it incentivizes those strategies. That's your point. And I just bring it all the way back around. The reason I think that this article and that the multiple articles you've written about this are so effective and have really stood the test of time is because instead of trying to say, proof of stake bad, proof of work good, you're just explaining the economics, or attempting to explain the economics behind it, which to me it's just so much more compelling. You're literally just saying, like, the work has to happen, and whether you see that work on the front end or in the front and it's visible and it's transparent, or that work happens behind the scenes, which then creates these dark corners that people can kind of take advantage of. It incentivizes these kind of bullshit or what I would consider to be bullshit strategies. But maybe that's unfair. I think moralizing it is not useful here. It just, the work happens somewhere. The only question is this, in contradiction to what proof of stake proponents would argue, is the only difference between proof of work and proof of stake is that in proof of stake, it's just obscured. And I love that term that you use, obscured proof of work. It's not proof of stake, it's just obscured proof of work.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you're also right that When I finally found the title, like I wrote the title last, I was like, this is the perfect title. Nothing is cheaper than proof of work, because I'm not even saying, like, I'm saying it's a tie, basically. And that's really the point of the article, is that as soon as you try to go cheaper, what you're saying is someone's getting free money for no reason.
Exactly.
And, everyone complain about that. And so that was the perfect title. And the moralizing of it is not good, because it leads people to think that you are like a brainwashed cult fanatic, and that you're not thinking rationally. And people, because it's part of the problem is you had this stuff Purecoin or whatever, you had stuff that was proof of stake, and it didn't just immediately burst into flames and stop. So you had to have some explanation of like this is also like vaguely possible, but that's different than saying it's worth doing. It's not worth doing. I really don't see how it was worth that. I don't see all the Ethereum's like R&D on proof of stake as being like a beneficial investment for
it's
humanity. And I think you really hit on it is that it's partially not genuine. I think that even they don't actually care. And it's kind of like it's a pretext. It's just saying there is a product of differentiation. They say
exactly
Bitcoin is all these, Ethereum is these other things. So that's why when the DAO hack happened in, I think, 2016, Bitcoin Magazine asked for a bunch of people for opinions, including me. And I was the only one who wrote the opinion of what they actually did, where everyone said they should respect code as law, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote, well, they got themselves into this stupid situation. But what I said was, Bitcoin would never rewrite this thing, and they're a competitor to Bitcoin. So what they should do is they should just do the other thing, because they want to be different. And that's smart. I think they've been doing that like literally since 2015. They've just been saying, how can we be different? When they go up on stage and dance, in costumes and stuff, like Jameson Lopp with like a machine gun in the forest. It's like they know that they're doing.
Yeah, I think,
and that's most of what this is. I think so. It's unfortunate that this starts to take up technical people's times, and the poor investor and the poor user start to research what is the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. Really, it was a marketing bullet point. I think maybe the whole time. I don't know, but it's probably going to. Since it's been going on for so many years, I'm sure people will still be talking. It sounds crazy to me, but I'm sure people will still be talking about this years from now. I don't know why.
You said something interesting, or you mentioned something earlier, which is like, this idea of the way that funds are currently allocated in our sort of traditional financial system, and sort of this idea of, a lot of the taxes we pay, the money that is printed, just instead of going towards productive work, instead is necessary just to perpetuate the system. You talked about sort of like in the past, it was like a lot of these funds and taxes went into sort of like creating like, highways and national parks and things like that. And now, this money has to get printed in order to just maintain pension funds, maintain Social Security. And I actually think that is kind of what's going on here when I think there's it's very similar to what's happened in the Ethereum space. It's like there's so much effort. You asked the question, like, why has there been so much, or people were surprised that there was so much money and research and time spent on trying to justify a proof of stake system. And I think it's for the same reason. I think those people are already so heavily invested in the system. They are like, well, this may not make sense. It's not actually a great idea, but we just have to pump all these resources, time, energy, work, PR into just continuing Ethereum as an idea and proof of stake as an idea, just because otherwise the alternative is they have to acknowledge that this is a failed enterprise.
Yes, I think it's just another part of the whole product differentiation contrast point, actually, which is to say that it's part of the Ethereum, whatever you want to call it, culture, that they will just raise lots of money and fund lots of weird like laboratory experiment type things. Like there was a long time ago, they were doing like ghosts, which was like Uncle Blocks. They may still do this. I don't even, I don't even know like what's in the final version now. They switched to proof of stake, but they would do almost every bizarre idea that was had in the whole period of like 2013 to like 2016 period. There were all these weird ideas about, should people do that? Should there be constant inflation? Should there be, what should happen with fees? And they just threw everything in. They really threw everything in back when I knew much more about it. There was like the 2015, 2016 period, they were just throwing everything in, and they had ghosts. That's what they called it, Casper, because it was like a pun. They had all this stuff. They're just mixing things together. And they did all this stuff, and that's part of what it is not so much even a proof of stake specific thing. It's just the Ethereum MO is just to have this giant expanding tree of complexity, and just to have more, because Ethereum is also kind of a developer focused thing, not to saying that it's better for developers, but it's just in terms of the quantity of, or the proportion of people is developer centric. So what I mean by that is there's a special appeal. Ethereum is like Bitcoin has a kind of mixture of things. It has like a property rights Texas type of a thing. It has like a drug user Miami thing. It has like a tech California cryptography thing. It has like the cypherpunk thing. It has like a libertarian thing. It has a little bit of a finance thing, with the chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks is the economics thing. Whereas Ethereum is more of like a kind of like crazy computer thing. If that makes any sense. Like it's more of like let's look at my weird algorithm. That's like kind of more of like the brand. And that's why I latch onto that when you say, well, they fund all this stuff. They just fund all this weird stuff like that. Whereas the Bitcoin thing, you would also have stuff mixed in, like you have like BitBlock Boom mixed in, where it's like not very much about code. It's about
it's like the idea. It's like, this crazy cool idea, and I just want to try it. And
free state project in New Hampshire, which had nothing to do with technology at all. So stuff like that is what I'm trying to get at. Hard point to articulate though. But like Ethereum, it's all about, and it's not about like elite.
No, it's
either. Ethereum is just like, with a developer. If you've got like a developer resume, they want you, so they try and grab these people in with it. And then one way of doing that is you just fund this whatever giant proof of stake.
I feel like we're off on a tangent now, but I come from part of my background is the software engineering world, and I wouldn't care if the Ethereum narratives were more truthful and accurate, or I should say I would care a lot less if it was like, hey, this is a just insane experiment. Like it probably won't work. In fact, it hasn't again and again and again and again, but we're here, we're just having fun. And obviously like we don't compete on the same axes that Bitcoin does. Like we're just here fucking around, and like maybe you put your money into it. Maybe you're a VC and you invest in this space, and like you should expect the same types of potential returns you do in any other random startups you invest in. It's like 1 out of every 100 startups is going to be, a win, and the rest are going to be total garbage and bullshit. But it's never presented that way. Ethereum is always presented as like fait accompli. Like it is, it's to your point, like it's happening. Like they've been saying that they're going to shift to proof of stake for, 5-7 years now. Like it's about to happen. It's right around the corner. Like let's fucking go, get ready. And then they just kind of crib narratives from Bitcoin, and when as the Bitcoin narrative of being sound money has become even more and more relevant, suddenly it's like, now we're ultra sound money, and there's no acknowledgement that like previously it was like the world computer narrative turned out to be bullshit and CryptoKitties broke everything. It's just like sort of what's next. It all just feels very, to me, it's like Ethereum is based in the fiat like VC ecosystem that exists, whereas Bitcoin is truly attempting to create a new and to stand apart from that. And it irks me so much that they intentionally try to conflate Bitcoin with everything else, including Ethereum and proof of stake.
But I think there's no, Paul, please go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that's there's a lot of truth to that. I think the question is, as Bitcoiners, like, why do we it's hard to bottom line everything, but it's like, what should Bitcoiners worry about with Ethereum? Like some people say we shouldn't worry at all because it's so badly run. And there's a lot of truth to that, or just that it's so different, and that it emphasizes such different things that it will eventually collide with like the Venmo path, like the centralized path. And because the issue with the centralization is not so much that centralization is morally bad or whatever, but it's just that you'll eventually have to compete with like Venmo, Visa, or central banks, and like a SQL database, and you can't do that, and you will get crushed. So the problem with the centralization route is that it's a losing route. It's a dead end. You can go for a while, but you will actually you'll be completely screwed, and you'll certainly be regulated to the point where it's impossible to do anything subversive to the extent that Bitcoin attempts to be kind of something novel. So that was the whole point of Bitcoin, is the novelty, is the decentralization. So I was just going to try to agree with that Ethereum does do a lot. I remember in September 2015, they said it was 3 months away, and I remember that happening. I remember joking about it at Scaling One. So they were saying, it was 7 years ago that they were doing this. And they also, I remember them doing weird other startup-like things, like Ethereum was paying people. They said, we'll pay you back later when the project launches, we'll give you tokens. They had like kind of like off balance sheet debt, or they had like weird, very startup like things. But that being said, there were a lot of competitors in that time that did way worse. I have another metaphor, which is that it's like a two-party system where Ethereum is like the challenging party, and Bitcoin is like the leading party. And then you have the third parties, which are everything else that no one really cares about at all. Because the only thing that can really challenge the dominant party, like the only thing that could seriously challenge the Democratic Party in the United States right now, would be the Republican Party. Like it's not feasible to challenge them with something else. To catch a thief, you need like another thief or something. So I think that's why it goes down to two. And that's why people actually care about Bitcoin and Ethereum. One of the other things, remember BitShares, NXT or whatever, all that stuff went away and never came back. Aurora coin, all these things, hundreds of them. And so Ethereum made it as a kind of a competitor, they partly by being different. But yeah, you were going to say something.
Well,
Mr.
I was just going to sort of present this question of, like, our current fiat system is proof of stake. And so it feels like almost more palatable for VCs, like you mentioned, P, or just regulators in general, to more readily accept something that they, I think, can wrap their minds around, versus an entirely new way of thinking and having a relationship with money. I don't know how much you necessarily buy that, given our entire conversation has just been proof of stake is just like really bad proof of work. You're just moving the work somewhere else.
Well, as I said, I think what it really is that the novelty of Bitcoin is the decentralization. I think that is so different that's actually what's difficult for people to understand. It's very easy for, especially VCs, to understand something where they say like, okay, give me 20% of this dollars or whatever. And it'll be like Solana. You go to A16Z, it'll give you whatever, 20%, 40% of this project, 20% of the whole project. Will give us that, and we'll give you this huge amount of money, and then it will pump, but it can never make it to hyper Solanization, whereas $15 million per 21 million Solana or whatever, and everyone in the world is using it, because what you were saying before, you were saying like Bitcoin represents more of like a conception of the public good. Bitcoin is like, the world will be better switching from centralized finance to Bitcoin. Whereas the startup model is too private, I think, believe it or not, because it's like one person owns 20%. It's too easy to just start a different project where you own 19% or you own 22% or some other number or something like that. So that's what they call an interest-based coalition, where everyone's held together by their own self-interest. But that's very difficult, because in game theory, there's this thing called divide a dollar game, where people can always undercut each other and stab each other in the back. Just three people are trying to split a dollar, but it's unstable. And that's very true in the real world. You need to have a conception of an idea about what is better for everyone. That's what I mean when I say a conception of the public good. And it's too difficult when someone owns 20% for that to land. Like, that's why I knew XRP would never make it. But in the meantime, they make enormous amount. They made enormous amounts of money for themselves. Good for them. But you have to really be able to make it. You have to have a story where it can get to $15 million per coin. And with Bitcoin, that involves lots of things like the whole darknet market, what used to be called System D, that used to be $10 trillion a year. Back when the U.S. GDP was like $15 trillion a year. When I looked that up, it was like a long time ago. But it used to be called System D. You have these badly run countries like Nigeria. No offense to the badly run monetary policy and everything, banking. Bad infrastructure, so people would switch. They'd say, "I don't care that I'm late to Bitcoin. I need to switch to something that will protect the future and protect my future as an economic, as a worker and a saver and things, and to just slowly take over the world because, but it's just too difficult if you have if people are too greedy and they take too much, and that is the startup model, though. But see, what if you went to A16Z and you tried? I mean, like it's just easier for them to understand something where they say, "Okay, we'll give you $100 million. We'll take 40% of the whatever it is, the Solana." I'm just making this up. I don't actually know the number, but it's something like that. And they say, "We'll do that," and then in return you can pump the thing from being worth whatever that was, $500 million for $100 million for 20%, $500 million. You can pump that up to like $6 billion in 12 months. Who cares that the cost of the full node during that 12 months is going to go from like very low to like much higher than anyone can afford, and then continue to just go up? Who cares about that, right? Who cares about that's the decentralization? You say, who cares about that? We're just going to flip $100 million into like $800 million. And so that's very, very, very easy for them to understand. And of course, you can see why people would do that, no offense to them. Good for them, but that is not the moral glue that binds the Bitcoin project together, where people actually feel like there's a problem in the world with the way the world works. And they say, I don't want the world to work like this anymore.
I have a question so the thing for me that really clicked when I started to learn about Bitcoin was the absolute digital scarcity component. That was the first part of Bitcoin for me that made sense. I am not technical whatsoever. I come from like a more financial background. I'm always let me rephrase. I'm a lot confused when that key component of Bitcoin and its value proposition are not discussed when you have other proof of work projects like Doge with an unlimited supply, or something like Ethereum that has to come up with different ways to try and cap its supply, but they never really have. Does absolute digital scarcity really have as much importance as younger Q thought it did, or was younger Q a little too naive?
Well, who can say? I mean, I wrote about this on my blog. I thought like it would be important to keep the inflation taxes very low because it's open source. So it'd be so competitive. Mm-hmm. And it would, like I was saying, you would be undercut if you tried to give too much to yourself. And interestingly, Satoshi gave a lot of coins to himself that he never moved and never spent. And so it's kind of like abandoned property. So it was a very selfless thing. It's well known that he really didn't give any coins to himself, even though he could have. But I think the problem with doing that is, like I said, it invites people to leave and go with someone else who can just say, I give myself a giant pile, only a little less or a little more or whatever, based on some other thing. So I wanted to also, before I answer a question, I wanted to say Ethereum, I think, is actually on sort of more on the right track with that particular thing, the ultrasound money. Which is to say, because they are trying to not only make the supply capped, but they're trying to make the supply shrink. I think they won't succeed for an unrelated reason about fee elasticity. But what they're trying to say is if we pay a lot in fees, instead of having 21 million ETH, obviously they don't have 21 million ETH, but I'm just saying apples to apples comparison. Instead of having that, they'll have an amount that declines from 21 million over time to 20 million. So they'll keep the inflation taxes even lower, so to speak, and they'll be even more competitive on that basis, which is great and good for them. So that's the thing that they do. That's a good thing for them, I think. And that's an example of them competing on our terms as Bitcoiners. And I think people should not be so hasty to just make fun of it just because it happens to involve a phrase that we like. But that being said, I think it won't actually work because I don't think people will pay enough in fees to actually make that happen, because I don't think people will pay a lot in fees in general, which is a completely different conversation that I wrote a completely different post about that people can read if they want, but it's very, very long. And so I don't think they'll actually succeed. It's much easier for Bitcoin to just be like very simply, and simplicity is very good. It's good for most users are, of course, not technical at all in a computer sense, nor in a finance sense or economic sense. So that's very difficult to get through to most people. You just tell them 21 million, it's very easy. And I think that's a good thing. And I think, again, we need to build, it's very political. You need to build a coalition of people. Everyone needs to decide, I'm going to leave at first a little bit the fiat world, and I'm going to go into the Bitcoin world more and more. And we need people to decide to do that. If we're going to do that, then we need to give them lots of reasons to do that, and they'll never buy a reason that they don't understand. So I think that the 21 million was very helpful, and is part of the magic secret sauce, so to speak. It's kind of annoying to me that now people in the Bitcoin technical community, such as, Peter Todd is famously, he loves being contrarian, so he won't mind at all being thrown under the bus, I think, by me. But in fact, he's going to love it. But, he's keeps reopening this door, tearing open this wound, this freshly healed wound about maybe we should add inflation to Bitcoin or whatever. And this is sometimes now treated as though it's a very sophisticated and edgy thing to talk about. And I think that's kind of untrue. I think no one in the Bitcoin community will go for that. Even like if it meant the death of the project, most people would probably want to try something completely different. At this point, it's just so part of the heart of Bitcoin.
Wait, so what is, forgive the ignorance of this, but like, what is the argument to introduce inflation to Bitcoin? Like, isn't that the whole point of Bitcoin, was to get rid of inflation?
Well, I think the point of Bitcoin was quite a few things at once. One thing is that it didn't, something decentralized, or that was just a protocol, respects the rights of the user. So even if it had inflation, you would still have a situation where your money was controlled by keys and people couldn't freeze it or steal from you or something. Couldn't steal from you in particular. With the inflation, they'd be stealing from everyone, but you would still have your kind of sovereignty and privacy. The reason involves the idea that once all the coins are mined, we have to pay the miners with something else, which will be fees, and the total purchasing power, the total amount of economic effort behind all the fees will equal the total amount of revenue given to miners, and that will equal how much money they spend on hashing, exactly by what we were talking about before, the whole proof of work equality theorem. So that $10 billion a year will go down to a very small number, and then there'll be only a few miners mining a little, and then the difficulty will be low. It'll be very cheap. It'll cost that amount to 51% attack Bitcoin. So anyone who wants to spitefully destroy Bitcoin, who's willing to pay that amount every year or every month, they can just keep the network off, basically. And that is why people don't want that to happen. They want the security budget, so to speak, that $10 billion a year. They want that to always be very high. And so they say, well, we can add. One way is to add inflation. I don't think that will ever happen, but that is a way.
Paul, I know we're coming up close to the end of our time. I want to give you the opportunity, because P was so excited to specifically talk to you about drive chains. I know obviously we don't have a ton of time on that before, like the less technically savvy people. How would you first just recommend an introduction to it, and where should we go to like really start to understand what this concept is?
Yeah, I thought it wasn't that complicated. When I first proposed it, the subtitle was even the simple two-way peg, but apparently I was never been more wrong about anything in my entire life, because apparently this people find this to be very mystifying, and almost a lot of people think it's too good to be true or some other weird thing. So I have a website, drivechain.info, and on that I have a YouTube playlist, and the first video on the playlist is I think it's like 18 minutes of me talking and then some questions, some Q&A. And that's not so bad, I think. But the drive chain idea is it says that you have Bitcoin blocks, and then you have blocks of something else called the sidechain, where it's a completely different piece of software. It might as well be an altcoin, but there's no coin there. So in the sidechain world, you send Bitcoin over to that piece of software, then you do whatever you want over there, and then you send the coins back. And the issue is, how does that happen? And I have a way where all the blocks of the side chains, these alternate chains, these different pieces of software, these completely different computer networks, which could be like Ethereum or like Solana, as far as anyone knows or cares. Those other blocks are optional for layer 1. So you can ignore them completely. They're fully ignorable. And nonetheless, I think I tried to set everything up so that it's really, really, really high degree of guarantee that if you send money over on the side chain and you give the money to someone else, and A gives it to B, who gives it to C, and then C tries to withdraw it on layer 1 back to Bitcoin, I tried to make it so that there's a really, really, really strong guarantee that C actually will get their money, even though the whole thing is ignorable. And I don't know what it's going to take to get people to understand how it works or why, but I do have videos with slides and visual aids and things on drivechain.info, and I have an FAQ, and I have the YouTube playlist is very long, and it includes various interviews with different people. And I have the BIPs. There's 2 BIPs, BIP 300 and BIP 301, if you want the exact details of exactly what the code is doing. And we also have software. So I have like a testnet fork of Bitcoin that you can download and run, and you can see all the side chains be activated in real time. And we have a Zcash side chain, so you can send coins over there and get a Z address and send Bitcoin to it, send Bitcoin out of it, and then send them back to the layer 1 chain. And you can see how it all works for yourself with the software. So we have BIPs, we have software, we have presentations, we have FAQs. I have memes up there. So that's the idea. And then I also published that idea in 2015, but unlike the nothing is cheaper than proof of work, which quickly became super mainstream, this idea has meandered its way in big circles around the mainstream, but is now people are finally starting to come around on it, and they finally appreciate it for how cool it is. Part of the issue was historical. So because partly I wrote it to solve the block size war, but instead people decided we can just fight the war and win, which they did. And then after they won, they were like, small blocks won, conservative Bitcoin, ossified Bitcoin won. And so that everything sharply resists all other changes. So I have various speculations on why drive chain took a very long time for people to open their minds to. But those are some of my guesses as to why. But if you go to drivechain.info, you should be able to find more information than you would ever want. And there is a link to a Telegram group, DC Insiders, t.me/DC Insiders. And you can go there and ask also any questions that you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really, like I said, I really appreciate the analogies. And I'll say one more time, it is I can't think of any other articles like this one that have stood the test of time so well. I mean, part of that obviously is given the situation we're in right now, but it's very well written. I highly recommend that everybody who's listening today go and check it out. It's Nothing's Cheaper Than Proof of Work by, of course, Paul Sztorc.
And I think measuring decentralization also held up, and
yes,
something that people should try to figure out. And that one is also has a very simple message of just it's the cost of running a new full node. That is how when that's low, you're decentralized, and when that's high, you are centralized. And that is that is also part of the key to understanding why drive chain it doesn't harm anything, because your layer 1 node is still very cheap to run and all the sidechain blocks are ignorable. So that's also a key to understanding sidechains, as well as merge mining and plenty of other very advanced things that even plenty of other big experts, I think, don't totally understand, at least not the way that they don't see it the way I do. So those are big ideas, I think. All from 2015, a good year for blog, I guess. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great.
We've got Ansel and FedWatch coming up next. Before we hop off, just want to remind everyone, we have Bitcoin Amsterdam happening in only 7 days. Get ready. If you do not already have a ticket, you can purchase one using code BMLive for 10% off. You can also use code BMLive to grab the magazine, which Q is about to throw on cam. It's fantastic. It's the best one yet. The one that will be coming in soon. The Orange Party issue is as amazing, if not better. Get them while you still can. My friends, we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Stick around after the break, and we will go straight into FedWatch with Ansel.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of FedWatch. My name is Ansel Lindner, but my co-host CK is not quite on the horn yet.
Oh, I'm here, baby.
Oh,
don't worry. Don't worry.
You doing, CK?
I showed up right in the nick of time.
Yeah. So how you doing, man? Busy day?
I'm doing busy day. We got less than 7 days until Bitcoin Amsterdam. So obviously a fury of activity to make sure that happens without a hitch. I did get a chance to catch a little bit of what Paul Sztorc was saying. The man is very, very smart, although I don't necessarily agree with him on drive chains. But yeah, excellent interview. And I am really excited to jump into a really, really action-packed and pretty busy agenda we got here in terms of FedWatch. So a lot to talk about in macro.
Yeah, tons to talk about. I mean, this week has been extremely fast-paced with there's some comments by Williams, who is the president of the New York Fed. So we have a transcript we're going to go over of a speech that he made. We have, of course, market turmoil. The UN came out and tried to dictate or demand monetary policy changes from the central banks. The oil stuff with OPEC going on today and yesterday about them cutting production. Also, we have the referendums that have happened in Ukraine, and the seasons are starting to change. So it seems like this part of the year right now is just a lot of things coming to a head, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can here.
So much coming to a head. And for all the listeners of FedWatch, this is stuff that we have been talking about for a long time. Everything here in terms of how geopolitical incentives are playing out, it's not like a huge surprise. None of these things are quote unquote black swans if you're actually paying attention.
Exactly. Another admin note I have up front here is, guys, check out FedWatch Clips channel on YouTube. I've been putting a bunch of clips up there, and now I'm actually putting the whole episode of FedWatch up there. So check out FedWatch Clips to keep up with all of our episodes. If you don't want to go through or if you miss a week and you don't want to go through the full 3-hour broadcast or whatever, you can always check out FedWatch Clips. I did put that one clip up there from the Zoltan episode. You remember that, where I detailed out all the different pillars, why his pillars were wrong, and why I think he's not going deep enough. He needs to go one layer deeper. But anyway, that's up on FedWatch Clips now, so check out that channel.
Hey, that was some great analysis, Ansel, and I do know there's a little bit of housekeeping happening in terms of FedWatch and where all the content lives and stuff like that. So some clarity will emerge soon, I promise. But you can support the show using Podcasting 2.0 and stream some sats over to Ansel and I. So Ansel, I need to give you the keys to that. But yeah, I got that set up pretty recently.
Awesome. Yeah. And also, I do a pretty long form write-up on Bitcoin Magazine for each episode. So check that out. I've seen people tweeting about that. So follow me on Twitter and read those posts when they come out.
Yep, absolutely. One last little reminder is the newest issue of Bitcoin Magazine, the Orange Party issue with Nayib Bukele's awesome op-ed inside of it, is going to be dropping later this month. I believe the first shipment comes to our warehouses by mid-October. So really excited for that one. Go and subscribe to the magazine right now at store.bitcoinmagazine.com. Use promo code BMLive. Get a subscription right now, and you will actually get the older issue. You'll get the censorship-resistant issue, which is absolutely amazing. And then you're going to get followed up immediately by getting the Orange Party issue. So get a quick 1-2 punch, 2 of my favorite magazines that we've ever produced. Go subscribe today. All right, Ansel, that's enough for me. Let's get into the show.
All right, so we have to start each show with a Bitcoin chart. So Chris, can we pull up chart number 1? There it is. We've had a good couple days here, kind of going towards this diagonal trend line. So we'll see. We've held the bottom here for now. We're going up. We're still pretty correlated with stocks, but I like this price action over the last couple of days. If you go to the next slide, that is
heavily correlated with stocks. It's like every time stocks rally, people leverage along Bitcoin every time.
Yeah, well, this is I've talked about this the last couple of weeks, and also on my newsletter, is this first ever weekly bullish divergence that did lock in last week. And so since then, we've seen that little pop this week in the price. So we'll see if this has some predictive power for breaking up from here. But I thought I would just put this back on the screen for everybody to see the first ever weekly bullish divergence. I think it's pretty bullish. Any other comments on price, Christian?
I mean, you brought up this weekly bullish divergence last week. So,
yep.
I mean, I really do think that if you zoom out, we are in this crazy kind of stage in Bitcoin's life where Bitcoin is currently just another asset. It's heavily correlated with the stock market. The same people that trade Bitcoin are also trading other stocks, stuff like that. But fundamentally, Bitcoin is different. Bitcoin is actually a physical network for monetary settlement, for Bitcoin settlement. And that activity is not like company activity. It's not affected the same way that organizations and businesses with cash flow are going to be affected as we continue to move forward in this monetary hurricane. So I really do think, I don't know if it's now, I don't know if it's in a year, I don't know if it's a few months, but at some point, scarcity plus utility will differentiate Bitcoin. So maybe we're seeing the beginning of that here. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great point. We should see some not divergence, but decoupling of these things. I mean, Bitcoin has performed very well since the great financial crisis, of course, and that was a big change in the availability of money. And people obviously get it mixed up here with that, oh, we've done so much QE, there must be so much money out there, so much liquidity. But in reality, what we have had is a monetary shortage because people don't have enough money to pay their debt, to service their debt. And so when we get into this a credit crisis era, which we are getting into a more acute credit crisis, monetary value is extremely important. So I think that Bitcoin could see a bid from that direction. I mean, we saw that with the pound when Great Britain or the UK had their issues last week. The volume of Bitcoin in pounds shot through the roof, I think, to a 4 or 5 year high. So, we're going to see Bitcoin get that kind of bid and possibly decouple from stocks, like you said.
Let's roll the next chart. Yeah.
Well, that's all the charts I have for today. I didn't bring any oil chart or any dollar DXY chart or anything like that. We have a ton of stuff to talk about from all of these different sectors. And the first one I wanted to cover was this speech from the New York Fed's president, and that's John Williams. So yeah, go to the next slide, please, Chris. This was a speech that he gave on Monday, and this is a transcript of his prepared remarks. So it was written before the UN stuff came out. It was written before the OPEC stuff came out. So this is kind of what they were thinking maybe this weekend or last week. And so I wanted to go through this a little bit here today. If you go to the next slide. The big thing I wanted to talk about is how they're defining inflation. I thought this was a crazy way to define inflation. So let's go through this. Williams here calls this the inflation onion. The sources of high inflation are many and complex. Okay. First, right off the bat, shouldn't it be money printing? I mean, that's pretty simple. It's many and complex. Okay. Well, that should trigger your thinking. Okay. He's talking about stuff other than money printing. He's talking about macro stuff, right? So let's continue. They are stretched and they stretch across the globe. Nearly all economies are experiencing unusually high rates of inflation. To better understand how that happened and what it portends, it is useful to think of inflation in terms of three distinct layers of an onion. In this analogy, the onion's outer layer consists of prices of globally traded commodities such as lumber, steel, grains, and oil. They have experienced a surge in demand as the global economy has rebounded from the pandemic downturn. So I'll add in here that people typically think of the commodity prices as the base layer of other prices. And he's saying that commodity prices are just the superficial outside layer of this onion. So I don't know if this is kind of a subtle dig at people saying that they're not looking deep enough into the sources of inflation, but let's continue reading here. In addition, Russia's war in Ukraine and resulting actions have caused energy prices to soar. Well, at least he includes resulting actions because it's actually the sanctions that are causing energy prices to soar. These higher costs get passed on as higher prices for consumers. I am sure everyone in this room has been forced to manage skyrocketing costs on important supplies over the past 2 years. Okay, now we get into the middle layer here. The middle layer of the inflation onion is made up of products, especially durable goods like appliances, furniture, and autos that have been affected by severe supply chain disruptions. So first layer, commodities. Second layer, products, durable goods. Nothing yet about money printing. Have you noticed that? In his inflation onion, the first two layers, nothing about money printing. It's got to be somewhere, right? So let's keep reading. This imbalance, I'm going to the next paragraph here. This imbalance between supply and demand has contributed to large price increases. To give some examples, prices for furniture rose over 13% last year. New cars were up nearly 12%, and used vehicles skyrocketed an astonishing 50%. The innermost layer of the onion consists of underlying inflation. Oh my God, that is amazing. So you're saying that inflation underlies inflation. That is a great definition, Fed president. What the hell? Like, so at the root of everything, at the bottom of this inflation stack is inflation. There's no talk about money printing whatsoever. It's so confused in my mind. Like, what are they even talking about here? Almost done here, which reflects the overall balance between supply and demand in the economy. Oh man, so supply and demand affects prices, which underlies prices. It's just so crazy. So I'm going to stop there. CK, any reaction to those definitions there?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's wrong with our current monetary regime, is that even the high priests of the monetary regime don't even know what the fuck is happening. They don't. And that's the whole issue, is that it is an opaque system that no one can actually use to effectively allocate capital. So this is why I'm so bullish on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin makes it so that anyone with even a smartphone can effectively validate and audit the entire thing. So it's like, people are like, where's Bitcoin 1,000x, 100x better than the existing system? Like, it's an infinity better. It's like something that no one understands to something that anyone can understand. So I mean, this is what's like, this is the whole problem. And then ultimately, I think this is really informed by you, but nothing grinds my gears more than people referring to, let's just say, an economy that's not working well, the destruction of globalization, the breakdown of supply chains, and then just blanket calling that inflation. Like,
yep.
It is beyond stupid. Like, I want to call it something else, but it is just like, it's beyond stupid, and yet it's common practice. Like, that's what everyone does, literally everyone, including Bitcoin proponents. It's like, no, like, you need to use proper definitions. Like, we need to be calling these things the right things. Otherwise, we're going to, like, hey, raising rate, is that going to fix supply chains? Like, no, it's not. Like, obviously not. But yet, that's what the Fed's doing. Like, it makes no sense. Like, if you can't identify something appropriately, how can you even try to fix it? And then just zooming out, like, no one knows what the hell is happening. No one knows what the hell is happening.
Well, if that triggers you, man, guess what the UN is writing about on our next segment? It is all about that. They're talking about how, the economies are crashing, all of this stuff, but it's inflation. And I'm just like, oh my God. So anyway, let's go on to the next quote. I'm going to skip slide number 5 and go to slide number 6, please, Chris. And that is the economic outlook. So this is, again, New York Fed President Williams, and here's his economic outlook. So what does tighter monetary policy mean for the economy? We are already seeing some of the effects. Broad measures of financial conditions, including borrowing and mortgage rates and equity prices, have become significantly less supportive of spending. This has led to a decline in activity in the housing market and signs of slowing in consumer and business investment spending. As this continues, I expect real GDP to be close to flat this year and to grow modestly in 2023. Now, I don't know why I highlighted that particular sentence, other than that's what I've been saying, is we're going to have close to flat on the real GDP this year. But I think this is interesting because what is the effect of what they're trying to do? Like, let's say the Fed could actually mechanically do what they say they want to do. Well, the result would be bankruptcies. The result would be worse supply chains, right? The result would be all of these things in the economy getting worse, which are the source of high prices. So it's weird. I think it's kind of backwards here, that people think that deflation or deflationary pressures always lead to lower prices, but they don't. In this case, when we have deflationary pressure provided by bankruptcies and credit contraction, it actually leads to higher prices. So if you're fighting those higher prices by more deflationary pressure provided by the Fed, they're actually exacerbating the problem. They're pushing us right
Yes.
into the gutter, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
It's like supply chains are punching producers and consumers in the face, and then the Fed is coming with like, hey, let's just come in with some undercut. This is for your own good. This is
Yeah.
to fix the punch in the face. If your gut hurts, maybe their face hurts less. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what else are they doing? Like, it's unbelievable. It honestly is unbelievable. And then they've tricked the entire rest of the idiotic central banking cartel to do the same thing, and then Britain is the first to pivot. So it is really honestly, it's hilarious watching it. It truly is absolutely mind-blowing stupidity.
Well, do you know what makes it make sense? It only makes sense if the Fed doesn't do anything. If all they're doing is narrative management. Because then it makes sense. Their narrative is, we will bring down inflation. That's the narrative. And then people are supposed to go out there and have a self-fulfilling prophecy and bring down inflation. So that's, I think, the only thing that can square the circle is the Fed is doing this counterproductive stuff because it's about the narrative. It's not about the mechanical nature of what they're doing.
I mean, with this, and you've been calling this out for a long time, Ansel, but I think this is the tide rolling back on the Fed. And, we're seeing that they are, in fact, swimming naked. Like, really, it's like, it's like they're pushing this narrative, which is just like, if you just step back and you take, a slightly educated look at the situation, you take your filters off. It's like, wow, this is absolutely idiotic.
Yeah, it's totally backwards. But let me finish up this last part here. This will be it for Williams. And he says, bringing down inflation, underlying inflation, which, remember, underlying inflation is what underlies inflation. That's his definition. But the inner layer of the inflation onion will take longer. But with monetary policy helping to restore balance between demand and supply, I see inflation moving close to our 2% goal in the next few years. So that is kind of their shot that it's going to last longer than we think. They're not close to pivot. He's using the term a few years. So yeah, that's it, man. That's all from Williams.
Yeah, our monetary system doesn't work. The high priest of the monetary system, the only people that can interpret the jibber jab, can't even interpret it. They're all idiots. They're all completely lost. They're all a bunch of buffoons with strange incentives. And Bitcoin fixes this. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but ultimately this is about having an economic system that people can actually use to allocate capital, and that it just does not exist today. And we're really in plain sight seeing it in the most obvious way possible.
Exactly. Another thing that struck me reading this transcript was something that came out about Powell's recent FOMC statements, where they put it through this algorithm and they try to evaluate what level of education you need to understand what these people are saying. And you can look at a history of Fed FOMC press conferences, and during certain years, I think it was Bernanke, when you had to be some level of college to understand everything that he's saying. And this recent Powell press conference was like 5th grade. So I think they're really dumbing down their rhetoric. And this is another example of that. They're just dumbing it down as much as they can to try to force a narrative. But yeah, what do you think?
They're using the same examples as Shrek in the Shrek movie to explain an ogre. With the economy is an onion, and when you peel it back, you realize the whole thing's bullshit. It is hilarious if they are dumbing it down. And honestly, it was pretty difficult to understand, the speech in general. So I don't know if it's actually 5th grade level, but that would make sense again if they're just trying to manage expectations and they're just trying to influence the market in that way versus actually being able to pull the levers.
Absolutely. All right, man. Should we move on to the UN? The UN trying to push around the Fed.
Let's do it, from one clown show to the next.
Yeah. All right, Chris, can you go slide number 7 there? So this is a article that hit the headlines, I believe it was on Monday. This is from the Wall Street Journal. UN calls for Fed, other central banks to halt interest rate increases. Chris actually sent this to me on Telegram in a DM. He's like, hey, I can't wait to talk about this on Wednesday. But if we go to the next slide, this is the actual report that these articles are talking about. Can we get slide number 8 up, please, Chris? So this is the Trade and Development Report, and this is a biannual report or whatever. It comes out after Q1 and after Q3. And this is where all of this stuff, UN is calling for policy change in the central banks. Now, right off the bat, I wanted to put this cover up here because what struck me is like it doesn't show happy people working internationally, at the UN, maybe some flags in the background, people shaking hands and smiling like everything's okay. No, what it shows is a cracked globe, a deglobalized world. What's happening to the world? I just think this is pretty amazing when you think about the visuals that they're portraying here. Is shit's going wrong. The world is cracking up. What do you think of that initial visual here, CK?
No, it absolutely is spot on. It just kind of shows you that, there's definitely pain. It's also interesting. Like, I don't know if that's like fire on the bottom left of the globe, or if that's like the sun. I don't know exactly what that is,
Yeah.
But it is extremely ominous imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was crazy. Okay, let's go to the meat of this issue. So can you go to the next slide, please? All right.
I just want to say that
yep.
it is funny when like there's like some like level of honesty, especially when it comes to like these reports or these visuals or whatever. And it does make you take a step back because you just assume like there's no honesty, that they're going to try to like paint some strange picture. And then you have to see like, wow, how bad is the situation if they're being forced to, move away from maybe like a positive bias.
Yeah, dude, you're reading my mind, because that's what we're going to do on a lot of this stuff. I actually agree with. It's just when they get to their policy stuff is what I don't agree with. And I was very surprised with the honesty of this report until, of course, you get to the implementation, which is all socialist and communist stuff. But okay, let's get on with this. So with financial entanglements since the global financial crisis becoming increasingly global, complex unanticipated shocks, including outbreaks and financial panic or extreme price volatility or a combination of external triggers, are a present danger. Monetary tightening poses additional risk to the real economy and the financial sector. Given the high leverage of non-financial businesses, rising borrowing costs could cause a steep increase in non-performing loans and trigger a cascade of bankruptcies. With direct price and markup controls ruled out as politically unacceptable, and if monetary authorities are unable to stabilize inflation quickly, governments might resort to additional fiscal tightening. This would only help precipitate a sharper global recession. And that's exactly what we are talking about there, that this monetary tightening is going to exacerbate the problem. It's not actually going to fix the problem, and they're calling it out right here in this UN report. All right, let's go to the next one here. Finally, what does seem likely? Oh, sorry, Chris, go back to the last one. I was just on the next paragraph. Finally, what does seem likely is that the impact of Fed tightening will be more severe for vulnerable emerging markets with high public and private debt, substantial foreign exchange exposure, a high dependence on food and fuel imports, and higher current account deficits. According to one recent estimate, an increase in the United States interest rates of 1% reduces real GDP by 0.5% in advanced economies and by 0.8% in emerging economies after 3 years. So I think this is interesting here because they are saying that emerging markets are much more exposed to a rising dollar, obviously, and it's going to hurt emerging markets more. And that's one thing that I have been saying. That's one thing we have been saying on FedWatch. Of course, there's been other strong dollar people out there in macro talking about this too. But now everyone's admitting it. Everyone knows, and they're starting to make sense. So any feedback on that one, CK?
No feedback. We've been saying it for a long time on FedWatch. This is where the alpha is.
All right, let's go to next slide. So here is a wow moment to me. They mentioned the shadow banking sector. So the large role of the shadow banking sector, which is really just the Eurodollar system, remember that's offshore unregulated banks, means central banks have limited capacity to control credit expansion in large segments of the financial system. That is even more true for central banks in many developing economies, as they have more fragile financial systems, higher debt denominated in foreign currency, and greater exposure to commodity price shocks. In fact, many of them began to raise interest rates already in late 2021. All right, continuing on. Today, inflation is caused by a mixture of disruptions in global supply chains, high container shipping costs, the impact of war on key sectors, sanctions on key sectors, higher markups, commodity market speculators, and the ongoing uncertainty in an evolving pandemic. So again, what don't they mention here? Money printing. They don't mention money printing. So all of this inflation that they're talking about here is not due to money printing. Of course, people will call me out and say, "Oh, are you saying that there is no money printing?" And I'm saying, no, most of the money printing happened before 2008, the great financial crisis. And since then, we've just been at a very low level of credit creation, just enough to keep the lights on. And that's about it. And as we have these temporary shocks, we're never going to be getting out of it. We're always going to be sliding back into this low growth, low inflation situation.
This is kind of like the Fugoid cycle of deflation. So what's actually happening is from 2008, we've been kind of going into this deflationary cycle, and it's just been intensifying. And effectively what people are characterizing as like the insanity that is our current economy, and like the lack of being able to make any sort of logical assessment of what's going on, like they're just blanket labeling that inflation. So yeah, I mean, maybe there's some like money printing, maybe there is like reallocation of capital into different pools, but ultimately the entire system itself is kind of just like effectively floundering to death. If you see again, the Fugoid cycle is this idea of like when a plane is kind of diving and it's trying to like stop and like control itself and reclaim up, it actually gets more and more volatile as it's trying to like stabilize throughout that process. So it's a very good mental model for kind of like thinking through how these things play out.
Yeah, exactly. I still need to study up on that and listen to some Bitcoin Tina, I guess, because he's all over that.
Hey, Matthew Pines. So we had him on the
Pines,
show,
okay.
But he definitely was one of the first people to really kind of like talk about how we're kind of seeing that in the economy.
Cool. Yeah, I saw he started episode 1 of the Pines Pod. So he's got his own podcast going on now.
Everyone's got to start a podcast at some point in Bitcoin. That's how it works.
Yeah. All right, so let's continue with this. In this situation, central banks cannot bring inflation down at a socially acceptable cost. Instead, supply chain disruptions and labor shortages require appropriate industrial policies to increase the supply of key items in the medium term. This must be accompanied by sustained global policy coordination and liquidity support to help countries fund and manage these changes. And why I underline sustained, I underline sustained global policy coordination, because that's not possible. I mean, look at what's happening with the sanctions. Half the world is on one side of a major conflict, and half the world is on the other side of a major conflict. And now they're trying to say we need sustained global policy coordination. No way on earth is that going to happen. I mean, this goes into is you start seeing what they want, they start sounding like WEF, management economy, socialist and communist policies, et cetera, et cetera. But got anything for this, or should I move on to the next one?
Let's keep going.
All right, next one, please, there, Chris. All right, the scarring effects of these trends reflect what some observers have dubbed super hysteresis, whereby external shocks lead not only to a permanent loss of output due to recession, but also to a permanent reduction in the potential growth rate, because the decline in capital formation and in aggregate demand lowers labor productivity growth. In many developing countries, this threat has been amplified by a process of stalled industrialization, and in some cases, premature deindustrialization, rooted in the rapid liberalization of both the capital and current account under structural adjustment programs in the 80s and 90s, blah, 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 blah. But what this says, what I thought that was awesome, is this is the deflationary cycle. They're nailing it on the head here. This super hysteresis, where the shocks lead to permanent loss of growth and output. It kick the can, but the next one is lower growth, lower inflation, kick the can, lower growth, lower inflation. And that's what they're detailing here. While interest rate hikes can fight temporary inflation pressures and help contain expectations, they also, as noted earlier, add to household business costs. In this sense, they will cause damage to the productive economy and increase exposure to future supply-side shocks, perpetuating the line of policy action that privileges financial markets over non-financial businesses. And again, this is exactly what we were talking about. So the world is facing a systemic crisis, and only systemic action can solve it. So now they get into their guiding principles for what they want the policy to get to. So let's go to the next slide.
I mean, before we do,
Go ahead.
can I just
Yeah.
jump in and like, this is something that is actually, I feel like, is very common, that we kind of see like good analysis, and then the assumption is the market doesn't work, we need coordinated top-down decision making to fix it. That is always the assumption. A lot of you see similar assumptions from environmental groups regarding, maybe, how we're treating the planet. That I don't want to stick to one narrative, but it becomes very obvious to see that these organizations operate within a similar framework, and their bias is that the market doesn't work. And that's a problem, frankly. Like, that is one of the key problems.
Exactly. It's always more intervention. Intervention begets intervention. And eventually you have every single sector, every single facet of the economy under the thumb of the central planner. And guess what they need for that? I think they need a CBDC.
They need a CBDC, but I also think that when that does happen, or if it does happen and it inevitably leads to worse outcome, they're still going to blame the market. Like, they're still going to blame the market. It's their fault. They're still going to blame the market.
Yep, it's always a market failure. Everything is blamed on a market failure.
Maybe the market's the only thing that doesn't fail.
Exactly. There's no such thing as a market failure. But let's get on to these policy programs that they say that all these policy programs should have the following elements. They need to contain inflation. So policymakers should avoid an undue reliance on monetary tightening and forswear a premature return to austerity budget. So don't go into austerity. You spend. Managing growth is the second one. Monetary and fiscal rules need to be better adapted, not just to respond to shocks, but also to support the much needed structural changes in the economy, such as industrialization in developing countries and the energy transition. Investment first. There needs to be higher public investment in economic and social infrastructure to boost employment, raise productivity, improve energy efficiency, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in an internationally coordinated effort. So, of course, an internationally coordinated effort is never going to work. Also, if you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you're not going to be raising productivity. So all of these things are counterproductive or counterfactual. They'll never work together. But if you go to the next slide here, these are their last two recommendations. So I wanted to read through these a little bit more in depth. So leveling up. while antitrust measures and income policies to boost productivity can help achieve more equitable distribution of income, redistributive policies can help mitigate unbalanced outcomes. These include the reinforcement of public service provisions and progressive tax reform, such as wealth and windfall taxes, together with a reduction of regressive tax cuts and loopholes. So again, this is straight out of pretty much the Communist Manifesto. This is what we want to do. We want to redistribute income. We want to cut down all of your tax loopholes, and we want to have just raise taxes and redistribute all that wealth. So let's go on to the next one. A new Bretton Woods. In an interdependent world, calling for greater ambition from domestic policymakers requires rethinking global economic governance from a development perspective. Again, rethinking things, redoing things. This is all a WEF calling card. It's a global Marxist calling card. Almost 8 decades from the foundational conference in New Hampshire, the international financial architecture is struggling to address the imbalances and inequities of a hyper-globalized world order. So what I would respond to that is, guess what? We're deglobalizing. That's what we're doing. So you can't respond to a hyper-globalized order. Well, that's okay, because we're deglobalizing and we're going to get new money, right? We're going to get Bitcoin is going to service this new deglobalized order. So that's all I have from the UN here. CK, any further comments?
I mean, I think that they're right that we are deglobalizing, that hyperglobalization, and I think credit fueled fiat money, probably all of that has created a lot of inequality. Again, I would say that is a centralized top-down decision-making issue, not necessarily a market issue. But Bitcoin is the new Bretton Woods. I want to go to kind of your talk track through what was wrong with what's his face, Zoltan's analysis a few weeks ago, because I think that you framed it perfectly on that podcast, which is that the framework of everyone working together, this kind of framework that let the Paris Climate Treaty work, this UN world, like of everyone getting together and working, to have some goal, like that framework is not reality in any way. And like, we're actually moving into a different sort of framework. So maybe I'll hand it over to you, Ansel. Like, can you repeat how you kind of architect, or how you articulate what is going on globally, and why this type of like nation state level coordination as like the basis of your analysis just makes absolutely no sense?
Yeah, well, just to reiterate what that was a couple weeks ago, Zoltan had 3 pillars. It was like cheap labor in China, cheap Mexican labor in the United States, cheap products from China, and something else cheap. Maybe it was cheap international commodities or something like that. But what I said was he wasn't going deep enough, and he needed to talk about what enabled those things in the first place, and that was a peaceful free trade era. And he said that in the sentence above that. He said, in this global era of peace, these are the 3 pillars. Well, no, he just skipped over the whole important part, talking about peace. And what have we seen since deglobalization started really taking hold? We see, of course, the Ukraine-Russia thing. We see Pakistan. We see some border conflicts between Tajikistan and I think it was Turkmenistan. We see stuff happening in Sri Lanka. We see stuff happening in Iran, all around the rimland of the world island that is Eurasia. We see conflict, even the rhetoric going on in China with Taiwan. Now, all of that is not peaceful rhetoric, and it's not good for business. So what's going to happen? Credit is going to be affected. Credit and global credit is going to decline. It's going to contract. So in the previous era where we had peace and good business climate and everybody could get a loan, and all of these countries, emerging markets, even the Western advanced economies could get access to cheap credit and could build up. Then we needed the market naturally chose a credit-based money for that because it was highly elastic and it could expand. But now, as we're going the other direction, what's needed is a money that is resistant to credit collapse. And a credit-based money is not that. You need to have a commodity-based money. Most likely Bitcoin is going to be chosen for this. So we don't need central planning. We just need to let the market go, and the market will naturally tend towards a credit, a money that is resistant to credit collapse. Does that make sense, CK?
No, it makes complete sense. And I think that if you look at the incentives, Bitcoin's game theory makes a lot of sense right now. The way that the world is situated, Bitcoin's game theory makes a lot of sense. And I think the next topic, which we need to get to because we're running out of time, also is another point in why Bitcoin's game theory makes sense. But let's talk about OPEC.
Okay, so this recent stuff with OPEC. So if you go to the next slide, Chris, this was a story that came out. Pretty much people started talking about it yesterday. I mean, there have been rumors about what OPEC was going to do at their in-person meeting. So this will be the first in-person meeting that they've had since COVID. And they were going to discuss their quotas, their production schedules and all this stuff. So some things have been leaking out in the weeks leading up to this meeting. It started as they were going to cut production by 500,000 barrels, then 1 million barrels a day. Then now yesterday, it kind of leaked that they were considering 2 million barrels per day. Actually, I think this leaked. Somebody walking into the conference mentioned this. And so then they made that a headline. But if you go to the next slide, this article made its way or made its rounds this morning. I saw it first on Zero Hedge and on Twitter. And they framing this OPEC move as a counterattack against the Fed. And I can see people really jumping on this narrative. So I want to kind of nip this in the bud if I can. But let me read what this article claims. So he says that no one knows how big the cuts will be, and frankly, it doesn't matter how large they are. Instead, the message is clear. The Fed can crash global GDP in their fight against oil. But OPEC wields a much larger stick and will cut production even faster. In fact, OPEC will do whatever it takes if the Fed continues on this path. OPEC has drawn a line under the price of oil and told the Fed that it's wasting its time. OPEC controls the price of oil, and oil is the world's central banker, not the Fed. I just think this analysis really caught on this morning, and I think it's completely wrong because the Fed OPEC does not want to cause more pain. They want their customers to be doing well, so that the economy, they can continue to demand oil and buy oil and all that stuff. They wouldn't purposely destroy demand. It just sounds like counterintuitive. So I wanted to nip that one before people kind of ran with that idea. But if we look at, let's see where I have this on the slides. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, the next slide is OPEC Plus. So I wanted to read a little bit from this article, just real quick. Of course, I'll include these in the show notes or the write-up to this that will come out on Bitcoin Magazine here in the next day or two. So they say in this article, the actual cut in OPEC Plus's production could be much smaller, considering that the alliance is estimated to be around 3.6 million barrels per day below its target production. So they're already 3.6 million barrels below their quota. And if they make a 2 million barrel cut to their quota, it doesn't matter. They're still 1.6 million barrels per day below their quota already. So it doesn't really matter. And the next paragraph here, let me say this. Arriving at the OPEC Plus meeting in Vienna, the first in-person meeting of the alliance since March of 2020, the energy minister of the UAE said that OPEC Plus is a, quote, technical organization when asked whether the US-UAE relations risk being damaged because of the large production cut. Most officials from the OPEC producers said any cut would be a technical, not a political decision, and cited a risk of recession for cuts as they entered the OPEC headquarters in Vienna. So I think this is all a bunch of fear mongering. I don't think anything's going to really happen from this quota cut that is coming out of OPEC. They're already producing way below their quota, and we could see some marginal differences, but that's it. Actually, if you pull up the last slide, please, Chris, this shows the quota and the production. And as you can see, in August, they were producing way below, almost 4 million barrels below their headline quota. So if they cut by 2 million, it's not going to be that big a deal. Okay, CK, back to you, man. What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, really what you're saying is that the market demand for their oil was below their previously set quota. So they're just readjusting their quota to try to be accurate. And that's what the comment on it, a technical decision. I mean, when you, again, I'm not an expert here. So, please take what I say with a massive grain of salt. But it is hilarious to see like these sort of like headlines used for political purposes, right? Like the lack of understanding is effectively being, taken advantage of for political purposes. And you see that from the West a lot. It makes you rethink, what they're selling you. Like, I really do think this is another example of the tide, pulling up, and, Western leaders getting caught once again with their pants down completely. And the fact that the market is actually driving all of this, and everyone's just, trying to maintain the narrative or whatever.
Yeah, one thing I noticed too was the reaction from the White House on this. Like, Biden apparently got really upset, and he was talking about, in November now we're going to release 10 million barrels of oil in November that they hadn't scheduled to release out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But they should know exactly what we just talked about here, that this is a technical decision to readjust the quota. I mean, that kind of makes you wonder, like, are the lights even on in the White House, in the strategic planning of the administration, and even in Western Europe? It just seems so incompetent.
I mean, from what I've seen, competence is not one of the things that's in strong supply right now amongst political leaders. A good friend, Nolan Bowerly, who does the breakup with Bitcoin Magazine every single morning, he said politics today is more like Veep than it is a house of cards. So I find that to be a very interesting analysis of the dynamics.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have for the oil OPEC stuff. I think we covered a ton of ground. So we talked about what the Fed policy, looking into some of the Fed's definitions. We looked into the UN. We went in a detailed examination of the UN report that was calling for changing monetary policy. And then we looked at the OPEC stuff. So I think that was a pretty well-rounded show.
No, absolutely. So last question for you, Ansel, is where does Bitcoin price go from here? I see us, chop in here. It's flat. It's painful. Breaks 20K, goes back to 19K. What are your thoughts?
I think there's not a lot. I mean, I think bears are pretty exhausted. So I think it probably will go up, and we'll see where the decision point is, if this is a bull trap or not. But I think that decision point is higher from here. So I think we go higher in the near and medium term.
All right. That'd be good for my bags. Ansel, that's all I got, man. Thanks so much for putting together a great show. Y'all, Bitcoin Amsterdam next week, starting Wednesday through Friday. I cannot recommend it enough. There actually will not be a FedWatch next Wednesday. We're going to be focusing on pushing out and highlighting all the amazing stuff that's happening over at Bitcoin Amsterdam the second half of next week. So don't miss out. Don't have FOMO. Go to Bitcoin Amsterdam. I'll be there. You should too. You guys can find me at CK_Snarks. Ansel, you want to close us out? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so if you guys will miss FedWatch next week, I know it will be a hole in your weekly schedule. You can always go and join my Telegram channel, t.me/Bitcoin and Markets. I live stream there almost every day, so you'll get your fill there. You can also find me on Twitter at Ansel Lindner. And that's it, guys. Thank you for having me on once again.
All right, let's wrap it up. See you, Ansel.
See ya.